My husband and I are both people persons. I used to work at the maternity ward at a local hospital while he's a private trainer at a popular gym downtown. He always has a story to tell about the many strange people that he meets in his line of work, but it's never mean-spirited. He shares the occasional anecdote or bizarre quote. People say the darndest things. Not too long ago, I lost my job at the hospital. They were restructuring the maternity ward. Most people were reassigned or fired. It was tough finding something new, but even tougher to stay positive. While my husband went on and on about the many interesting characters that he had met, I had little to share but what jobs I had applied to. After 2 months of searching, my husband had a proposition. Turns out one of his regulars had need for a private nurse. I'm using a fake name here to keep some semblance of privacy, as what I'm about to tell you relates to his medical history. Let's call this client Lucas. Lucas is not the kind of person you think would have need for on-site medical assistance. He's in his early 40s and has exceptional physical health. Since the reason behind his need for a nurse was very much a personal health matter, my husband had no idea what the job was really about. There was nothing obviously wrong with Lucas. "You can just talk to him," my husband said. "If you don't like it, that's fine." I was very against it at first, but after 2 months of rejection letters, or no letters at all, I was willing to give anything a shot. It'd be nice to have something new to talk about, to share an equal scoop of, "You'll never guess what happened at work today," at the dinner table. So my husband set up a meeting. I met Lucas at his mansion one late October afternoon. The sun was already setting, but it was the only time that he was off work. Lucas worked at least 10 hours a day, sometimes more, and often on the weekends. Still, it afforded him the luxury of a high-end lifestyle, with the cars and housing to go with it. Parking my Toyota in his driveway felt like an insult, and the check engine light taunted me. Lucas came out to meet me with a hand outstretched. He was tall and athletic, with thick, bottle-cap-like glasses. He covered his bald head with a black baseball cap, proudly displaying the company logo. I won't share what it is, but you would recognize it. Guaranteed. I shook his hand and took a good look at him. I could tell that behind his perfectly white teeth and upper body strength, this man was exhausted. The eyes couldn't lie about that. "Thank you for coming along," Lucas said. "If you're half as fantastic as your husband is telling me, we're gonna get along just fine. If I were even half as fantastic as my husband says, I'd be running this country," I laughed. "But thank you." He gave me a quick tour of his 3-bedroom house, taking the time to acquaint me with his lifestyle. Apart from work, he didn't do much. Working out, going on the occasional hunting trip, swimming. Lucas worked remotely as a sort of liaison for a multinational company and had to be on standby if there was anything major going down. He spent a lot of time writing messages in relation to major shareholders and handled at least 2 major investment relations. It was high-stakes work with hundreds, if not thousands, of jobs on the line. "If I make a bad call, we could inadvertently shut down a small town in New England," he said. "And that's not an exaggeration. That's an actual problem right now." And there it was. That was the quote that I was bringing home to the dinner table. It felt good to be back. After the tour, Lucas sat me down in the kitchen and offered me a glass of carrot juice. His kitchen was bigger than my living room, and it seemed like half the cabinets were empty. The man had 6 types of freshly pressed juice, ready to go. "Well, you seem to have it all figured out," I smiled. "I can't imagine why you would need a trained health professional." I get why you would think that, said Lucas, polishing his glasses. But I have a condition and it's starting to become a concern. I need someone with experience and, discretion. Well, of course, I said. Patient confidentiality extends to nurses. So any and all conditions that I may or may not have stays between us. Well, absolutely. I took a sip of the carrot juice, feeling a bit of a sting. I coughed. There's some chili in there, he smiled. It's spicier than it looks. We walked out to the terrace overlooking his backyard. He had a nice, handmade furniture set along with a barbecue, but I could tell that it hadn't been used in a while. The view was pretty neat though. There was a large open space with a decently cut lawn. You could see the edge of town to the east, and a vast forest to the west. Birch mostly. There are all kinds of sleep disorders, he said. People who talk, walk, or scream in their sleep. Some don't sleep at all. I have something similar and I need someone to make sure that I'm okay. Well, that sounds serious. Are we talking about sleep apnea or something? I got these pills, right? Lucas said, rattling a pill bottle. It's like turning off a light. Knocks me out cold. It's the only way that I can sleep without being a danger to myself. But they're a pain in the butt. Side effects are nasty. What happens if you don't take them? Well, that's what you're here for, Lucas sighed. I have a form of hypernoctambulism, and this is where Lucas informed me of his ailment. Up until that point, I had never heard of it. A lot of people know about sleepwalking, but this was much more severe. Hypernoctambulism, or in more common words, sleeprunning. It sounded absurd. He showed me to his bedroom. While the rest of his house was tidy, this place was a mess. His king-sized bed looked like it hadn't been made in weeks. There were pill bottles on the nightstand, along with the gadgets and clothes strewn across half the bed. He had nailed some sort of straps to the side of the bed, and he had a mouth guard next to his pillow. I frequently run into things, he said. I knocked out a tooth once. I gotta take precautions. He explained the various ways that he tried to control it. Strapping himself down would work sometimes, unless he had managed to worm his way out. He had tried literal chains and handcuffs, but he just ended up hurting himself. His bruises would get so bad that they eventually broke through the skin. He showed me scars along his arms. I move so much that it chafes all the way through, he said. It gets a bit better with the Velcro straps, but they're easier to get out of. He showed me his turquoise sleeping shoes. Since he could take off running, he would often hurt his feet. Waking up at the side of the road with bloody soles was a nightmare in and of itself. I could tell this was a major part of his life. He told me at length about the many ways that he had tried to fix it, and he always came back to that pill bottle. He hated it. It wore him out and left him feeling dazed all day long, which was starting to affect his work. Lucas needed someone to check up on him a few nights a week to make sure that he could sleep without taking those pills, and without hurting himself. I figured you could help, he said. Maybe you have some ideas. Don't you have any recommendations from a physician? This is it, he said, rattling the pill bottle, but it's just not working out. Well, then I guess I'd have to see it. You know, figure out what I'm up against. So you're on board then? I was. We agreed on a trial period. We'd start with 3 nights a week, and if it all turned out well, we would increase it to 5. Lucas was okay with taking his pills every now and then, but he wanted as many nights as possible without them. His job was very demanding, and the side effects of the sleeping pills were nasty enough to completely kill his momentum. Sure, sleep running took its toll as well, but at least he got a proper REM cycle out of it, except when he hurt himself. Eventually, we parted ways. We shook hands and I made my way home. While I couldn't tell my husband about Lucas's actual condition, I was eager to talk about my day as a whole. It felt good to contribute to the discussion around the dinner table. Things were balanced again, and I decided then and there that I would do whatever it takes to make this work. I needed this. But there was that itch in the back of my mind that told me this wasn't normal. I had never heard of this condition, and it seemed more than just unusual. I could deal with working nights, but I wasn't prepared for what this job might really entail. I had a feeling it was spicier than expected. And 2 days later, I returned to help Lucas with his first session. I arrived at 9 p.m. and he had already prepared by then. I hadn't planned my sleeping schedule ahead as well as I should have, so I stocked up on mango-flavored energy drinks and chocolate-covered nut bars. Lucas also reminded me that I was free to drink as much fresh-pressed juice as I'd like. He called it a night at around 10 p.m. sharp. He seemed a bit uncomfortable going to bed without strapping himself in, but he kept his sleeping shoes on. Despite all preparations, I felt like I had no idea what was really coming. Lucas seemed genuinely distraught, like he was gearing up for a marathon. He turned on a white noise playlist and turned on the lights, and he asked me to wait outside. "It usually doesn't start right away," he said. "Check in on me in a while." As I left, he cleared his throat and looked up from his pillow. "And close the doors. All of them, just in case." Lucas had an alcove in the hallway outside his bedroom, where he had set up 2 recliners with a table in between. It was insanely comfortable and a perfect setup for reading or listening to audiobooks. Lucas told me that he was okay with me bringing something to do while I waited, so I had stocked up on podcasts. As the hours passed by, it was difficult to imagine what would happen next. It was just past midnight when I heard a strange noise coming from the bedroom, like a shrill groan, slow and drawn out, and then footsteps quickly approaching. I barely had the time to take off my headphones before something slammed into the bedroom door, rattling the paintings on the wall. I could hear Lucas getting up and running back and forth, like a fly trying to get out of an open window. Finally, he gave the bedroom door another smack. This time it gave way. His eyes had rolled back in his skull, and his mouth was wide open. His head was flopping back and forth like a dead fish, and his arms hung haplessly at his side. It was as if he was being pulled forward by the torso, only using his legs to keep up. For a second, he just stood there, as if pondering his options. And then he started running. I didn't know whether to get out of the way or to tackle him, and so I did neither. Instead, he just passed me by, smacking my shoulder as he went along. He hurried down the stairs, clearing 3 steps at a time, and slamming into a wall as these stairs curved to the left. Some kind of diploma came tumbling down, covering the steps in glass. Good thing you wore shoes. I ran after him, and I didn't even notice that I was calling out to him, trying to grab his attention. I know it is said that you shouldn't wake a sleepwalker unless necessary, but he was hurting himself. I had to at least try something. I followed him throughout his house as his flailing arms knocked over every piece of curio along the way. He groaned the entire time, the noise being interrupted with every forceful step like a stalling engine. He accidentally pushed the doors to the terrace open and he ran out into the backyard. I followed him, but he was much faster than anticipated. Seeing him out there was unreal. It felt like a bad dream. He looked like a flesh puppet being pulled along by invisible strings, stumbling forward with what little control that he had left. It wasn't random either. He was going in a straight line, as if towards something. I tried to keep up, but I couldn't run with the same reckless abandon. He was getting away and I was already getting winded. As he reached the edge of the birch forest, his poor motor skills caught up with him as he ran headlong into a birch tree. By the time that I got to him, he was having some sort of micro seizures. He wasn't breathing. I had left my phone upstairs and I couldn't call for help, so I had to act fast. I rolled him onto the side, put my arm under his head and started smacking him between the shoulder blades. 3 or 4 smacks later, I heard his breathing return as slow and steady. He was okay. Lucas took his pills and he dreamlessly passed the night. We scheduled another trial 2 days from then, giving me some time to process what had happened and to plan ahead. I had never seen anything like this before. I was no stranger to patients having seizures or wandering off in a stupor, but this seemed coordinated, purposeful even. 2 days later, I met with Lucas again, a bit earlier this time, so we had time to discuss precautions and what steps to take. I could tell that he was having trouble concentrating, probably a side effect from taking the pills. He had trouble making complete sentences. I didn't have a lot of ideas, just strapping him in would be a temporary fix, but I figured we needed something more permanent. As Lucas stepped outside to take a phone call, I wandered around his house looking for inspiration, and I found something. I don't know if it was brilliance or stupidity, but Lucas had a home gym. Among his possessions were this state-of-the-art treadmill. It was wide enough for 2 people to fit and had tons of settings, including a dynamic speed based on how fast you're running. When Lucas came back, I pointed at it. "Have you tried setting this up?" I asked. "You could run for hours on this thing." "I can't really control it," he said, "but you could try guiding me onto it." "You think that's crazy?" No way," he smiled. "Quite the opposite." We moved it up and set up a dynamic speed and placed it by his bed. We had it in direct line from bed to door, hoping that he would run straight onto it. I also suggested covering the door in protective foam and installing a bolt lock on the outside, something so that he couldn't accidentally open it from the inside. He was very receptive, and even though it was all just loose ideas, he wrote it all down. Lucas was nothing if not thorough. That night, I only stayed in the hallway for a short while waiting for him to fall asleep, and then I went inside and I watched. I had adapted my sleep schedule a bit and I didn't need quite as many mango-flavored energy drinks that night. I made do with some of the chili carrot juice. Most of it was left on the table next to me though. I was too nervous and I kept tapping my foot. It echoed off the hardwood floor. Just short of midnight, Lucas started to stir. I got up and I readied myself. It was such a strange sight. In one swift motion, he went from sleepy into a sit-up to kneeling to full-on sprinting. I placed myself between the treadmill and the door, hoping to tackle him if he missed it. Luckily, he didn't. In 2 steps, he was on that thing, and the electric motor hummed to life. At first, I thought he would be too quick and accidentally tumble over it, but the dynamic setting kicked in and adapted to his pace, and seconds later, he was running at a steady pace. The bars on the side kept him straight. At first, I laughed. It was a relief to see it work. It was such a strange solution, but it was simple enough to do the trick. But all the excitement started to fade as I got a good look at him. His blank eyes, the wide open mouth. I couldn't get over just how alien he looked, and how misappropriated his body was. It really looked like he was using it wrong, like he didn't know what to do with it. And those eyes, there was something there. There was something behind them, something purposeful. It made me cold in my stomach, like I had swallowed a block of ice. Like I was watching something profound, something inhuman. Lucas had slowed down to a jog after about an hour, and fully stopped somewhere around 3 a.m. By then, he just stood there looking straight ahead with those white, dead eyes. Eventually, those eyes closed and he crawled back into bed. By 6 a.m., his alarm went off. He took a shower and he met me downstairs for breakfast, and I could tell that he was in a good mood the way that he hummed along with the radio. I told him what had happened and he was elated. "Oh, this is amazing," he laughed. "Just amazing. You have no idea." He finished up some pancakes, served with cucumber water and a few slices of an orange. He plopped down on a chair across from me. "I feel so energized. I ran it off. No bruises or broken bones, and just a little sweat. This is beyond amazing." "Well, I'm glad we could work something out," I smiled. "You think you're still gonna need my services?" "Are you kidding?" He dried off his hand and reached out to me. "I'm gonna need you at least 5 days a week, maybe 6 if I'm busy. This changes everything." I considered it. It'd be a challenge to stick to that kind of schedule, but the pay he offered would far surpass what I had made at the maternity ward. Besides, I could probably get used to it. Once I got him on the treadmill, the rest of the night was a piece of cake. And so I shook his hand and hoped for the best. For a few weeks, I got into this really weird routine. Waking up in the middle of the afternoon, shopping for groceries, doing some chores. Dinner was starting to feel like lunch, and I had to start moving my meals around. I got really into various podcasts and YouTube channels, and I would sometimes sit for hours on end without having to do anything. There were a few stumbles along the way, of course. Sometimes Lucas would slip, and I would have to guide him back to the treadmill. Other times he would roll out of bed on the wrong side. It was a bit of trial and error, but little by little it started to turn into an actual job. Sometimes we would go the entire day without talking, as Lucas would often be busy. But compared to how he had seemed when we first met, he was much better off now. Hallie told me that his hair had started growing back. It's gotta count for something. Still though, I could never get over the way that he looked at night. Those white eyes were burned into my mind. And then there was this one night in late November. I had been working with Lucas for some time now, and we were getting used to the routine. It was a bit tricky to navigate a working social life, but I managed to make do with the time that I had. We had figured out a schedule where I was working every other weekend, rotating the days in a way that Lucas never had to take his sleeping pills more than 2 sessions in a row. And that particular night was nothing special at first glance. I had prepped the last episode of the podcast that I was going to listen to. I had charged my phone, and I had gotten a glass of that carrot juice from the fridge. Lucas had settled in for the night, and the treadmill was all set up and ready to go. As he started to drift off to sleep, he turned to me. "There's this dream," he said, "where I'm running through a field, just this endless meadow. I have all these friends and we're going home. It's the final day of school, the first day of summer. And that sounds wonderful." "It is," he smiled. It really is." He turned away and sighed. "It makes you want to run." As he fell asleep, I got ready to steer him towards the treadmill. I was waiting for the sit-up, the kneeling, and then the sprint. It was routine by then, but I still couldn't get over that unsettling feeling that I got when watching him move. It had given me countless sleepless hours. When he started to stir, I was already up on my feet, waiting by the treadmill. But I could tell that something was off. He was slower than usual, more deliberate. In a controlled motion, he sat up straight, his head hanging loose against his shoulder. For a few seconds, we just looked at one another. Those white eyes rolled back in his skull. I could see his chest rising and falling quickly, like a panting dog. He closed his jaw, straightened out his head, and looked right at me. "Hello." The way that he said it made me shudder. It was barely his own voice anymore. It sounded feminine, dripping with hatred. Lucas's body language shifted as he rolled his shoulders. "Release me," he continued. "And go back to sleep, Lucas." With a series of fluid motions, he stood up in the middle of the bed, those white eyes still fixated on me. I could feel that block of ice churning in my stomach. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't having a nightmare. It was right there, and it was something far beyond what we had planned for. "You run." He grabbed a glass of water from his nightstand and hurled it against the floor. In one movement, he got off the bed and swooped up the largest piece of broken glass, wielding it like a dagger. I wasn't waiting to find out what he was going for. I hurried out of the door, shut it behind me, and used the bolt that we had installed to lock him in. I heard a deep thud, followed by a sharp tapping as the broken glass pierced its way to the door frame. I realized that I had left my phone in the other room. The pounding on the door stopped, and I heard footsteps fading away into the distance. For a moment, I thought that it was over, and then I heard a loud crash. I only had a few seconds to react. There was this strange droning sound coming from Lucas, and I could hear it from outside. I figured he had made his way out and was heading for the forest. But no, he was coming back inside. I heard approaching footsteps making their way through the kitchen. I considered my options. I could go into his bedroom, get my phone, and call for help. But no, the lock was on the outside of the door. He could make it inside long before help arrived. I could hide, but for how long? And where? No, there was only one real option. Running. I hurried down the stairs and headed straight for the front door. I knocked over a metallic urn on the way, along with a chair and a vase with a dry blue sunflower. I could hear Lucas gaining on me, dragging something sharp along the walls. I looked back, but only for a second. His hands were outstretched, as if coming in for a big embrace. He held his sharpest knife in his left hand, usually reserved for cutting oranges. It scraped against the wall, leaving a long, straight line in the wallpaper. His head was swinging haplessly side to side, again deemed useless by whatever force was pulling him forward. And those eyes were still white as death, accompanied by an absurd grin. Every other step I heard him spit out a growling, "Run!" at me. He was much faster but had little to no control over his movements. He kept bumping into things, stumbling and slipping. Every time I turned a corner, I gained a few seconds. But he was clever, and I couldn't just run circles around him. It felt like no matter what I did, those footsteps were coming closer. I decided to take a gamble. It had been particularly cold outside and the grass was slippery. He didn't have much traction with those rubber running shoes. I figured with enough twists and turns I could make him slip. I burst through the back door past the terrace and into the open grass. Lucas followed, repeating the same word over and over and over with every step. "Run, run, run." He ran out into the grass but quickly stopped. It was as if he realized he wouldn't be able to run out on the surface. So instead, he dropped to all fours, his head dangling like a bag of groceries. He didn't need to look at me. He knew exactly where I was. I turned to run, but it was already too late. He was gaining on me. I heard the gallop of hands and feet coming closer. And then nothing. A breath later, I was knocked to the ground. It felt like the world had turned on its head as he slammed into me. I fell hard, twisting my ankle in the process. I had the wind knocked out of me. For what felt like an eternity, I laid in the grass, counting my breaths. My mind was disassociating, forcing to imagine myself somewhere else, doing something different, something far away where the grass was warm and the air didn't hurt. But nothing happened. Looking to my right, I saw Lucas lying face down, having those micro seizures again. He had had a bad fall, and I could see the edge of the knife poking through his collarbone. He must have landed on it. "Lucas," I wheezed. "Are you?" No response. I couldn't even tell if he was breathing. In the faint light coming from the house, all I could see for certain was the edge of the blade. It was covered in red. I slowly got up on my knees. I kept holding my stomach, feeling like I was going to be sick. That block of ice felt heavier. I crawled over to Lucas. The second that I put my hand on his shoulder, there was a loud snap, but not from him. I turned towards the forest. There were no less than a dozen people staring at me. White eyes gleaming from loose-necked skulls. Men and women, young and old. "We," said one. "God," said another. "You," said a third. I turned to run, but I couldn't put any weight on my foot. Instead, I fell and was overcome with a dozen hands. One of them grabbed my hair, another my leg. They started pulling me away and dragging me into the forest, leaving Lucas to bleed out in his backyard. My screams echoed through the birch trees, rattling the leaves. I remember feeling bark against the palm of my hands and moss under my fingernails. There was nothing that I could do. The ice in my stomach exploded into a full-blown shiver as my body went into a panicked shock. At some point it stopped. I was pressed against the ground, deep in the woods. We were in a small clearing where something had broken the ground apart. There was a chasm ahead, at least 20 feet deep, and something down there was moving. My captors had surrounded me, but one of them stepped out to the edge of the chasm. In between my screams, I could hear my assailant talking. "Yes," it said. "We join." "EO," groaned the others in unison. "We run." "EO." "We are blameless." "EO." 4 of them pulled me up by the arms, holding me aloft like a scarecrow. All the fight had run out of me, leaving me panting and crying. I could barely see them. All the light from the house was far gone, and the moon was partly cloud-covered. And yet, even then, I could see the reflections in their white eyes. An offering. Maybe Lucas was the intended offering. Maybe stopping him over and over made them consider another. I peered over the edge of the chasm and saw something stirring, ivory white and worm-like. A myriad of black spots in groups of 2, like 100 empty craniums looking up. "EO," they chanted. "EO." I felt a hand loosen its grip as something eagerly stirred below. And then a gunshot. Lucas's shotgun was meant for hunting quail, not people. But that doesn't stop birdshot from packing one hell of a punch. As the abductor to my right took a blast to the solar plexus, he lost his grip on me and tumbled into the chasm. The white worms below massed into a frenzy. I could hear tearing, biting, and bones breaking as the mass of white turned into a pinkish red. They dropped me flat, and I started slipping downward. Putting weight on both my feet, even my wounded one, I managed to steady myself. But still, I was inches from completely losing myself. I heard another blast and flinched so bad that I nearly lost my grip. They scattered, running in all directions, laughing along the way. Dragging myself back up, I took one final look into the chasm. It was empty. We made our way back and we called for help. Turns out that accidentally stabbing yourself was enough to snap Lucas out of it. When he did, he had called for help and got his shotgun and followed my screams into the woods. Neither of us knew what was down there in that chasm. It used to be some sort of pond that had been drained, leaving this large hole in the middle of nowhere. We filed a report for an attempted abduction, but it was difficult to keep our story straight. I tried to tell it like it was, but Lucas had switched a few events around to make it more believable. When things stopped adding up, the police had chalked it up to some kind of home invasion gone wrong. There were no arrests. In a strange twist of fate, this somehow cured Lucas of his sleep running. He explained it like a deep-rooted feeling that whatever had been trying to lure him out had sort of lost interest. Maybe they were looking somewhere else, or figured he wasn't worth the trouble. But even now, long after the fact, I still have nightmares about it. I remember feeling so helpless, watching the world pass me by as I'm drawn deeper into the woods. And sometimes, according to my husband, I've started sleeping with my eyes open. And when I do, my eyes are white. Peter, can you even see anything up there? Harry, the oldest yet least mature forest ranger, said over the two-way. High on my perch in Tower 3, I had a full 360-degree view of the national forest that stretched out to the horizon. This was a dumb joke that he liked to ask every time that I drew the short straw for this position. Yeah, vision is clear. No smoke, no fires, no adverse weather conditions. Cool, hey, can you see me flipping the double bird to you? He said this so often that I mouthed the words as he spoke. Harry, like stress or radiation, was fine in small doses, but God help you if you have to have a weekend shift with the man. That's a negative, I said. How's campsite duty? Oh, slow, there are like 5 campers here and 2 of them are hosts. Filth Hat Jack is back as host of the Western Loop. Can't stand that dude. Oh, he's not bad. A little gruff, but once you break through, well, he's still a little gruff. I said, trying and failing to find something nice to say about Filth Hat Jack. Gruff like those goats from the fairy tale. Weren't they devils or sold to the devil or tricked a devil? Oh, I'm not up to date with my billy goat folklore. That's why they put you up in the tower. Meanwhile, the rest of us grounders are thinking of playing poker later. Ground squirrels, or grounders, was the nickname that Harry made up for anyone not working in a lookout tower during their shift. It never made sense to me. Squirrels can climb trees, which are nature's towers, but the name stuck. Tower dwellers were named after the high-flying sandhill cranes, which inevitably got shortened to sandies. Oh, you all suck at poker, I said. You have to be able to bluff and lie to win. All the people on grounder duty are basically priests. Now me, I can spin yarns like the best of them. Hey Nitnuts, why don't you spin me a yarn about how you lost $100 last time you played? Guys, these two-way radios are for emergencies, Gwen said, her voice sounding more exasperated than usual. She was another Sandy set up in Tower 5 about 20 miles northwest of me. She had gifted kid vibes, which made sense, as she had been one and was easily annoyed with the rest of us. But everybody loved her, and deep down she loved us too. But like really deep down. Call John Hammond, we found insects in ancient amber, deep. Gwenny, Harry said, dragging out her name. You promised not to play school marm today. George is gone for the week. Let's enjoy a boss-free day. Gwen sighed. 1, I never promised anything, and 2, you know that I hate Gwenny. And 3, I was a troll in the 3 Billy Goats gruff legend, she said before adding, oh, and 4, you are the absolute worst poker player in camp, Peter. Boom, Harry said. I couldn't see him doing his bullhorn's hand charging at you move, but I knew that he was doing it. The man was in his 50s, he had kids in college. Everyone knows Bud. Yeah, Gwen is right. These two-ways are for official business only. Sandy 3, out. Have fun with Filth Hat Jack, Gwen said. Sandy 5, out. I'll pray no sudden thunderstorms come rolling in, Harry said with a laugh. Grounder 1, over and out, baby. Suck my butt. Again, this man has a mortgage. When I'm on tower duty, I always bring a book or two. When you're up in the gentle rocking and quiet of the air, you can get a lot of reading done. I'm currently going through a series of horror movie tie-in novelizations. I just finished Alien and The Fog and was looking forward to The Blob. I wanted to do a run of 40s pulp detective novels next. No, I don't have a girlfriend. Why do you ask? Anyway, after about an hour, my two-way came to life. Sandy 3, this is Sandy 5, do you copy? And Gwen was always so formal. Sandy 3 to Sandy 5, I copy. Hey Pete, you get any emergency calls in the last 10 or so minutes? Negative. What's up? The cabin's two-way started squawking a bit ago. First it was just static, but then, well, it kind of sounded musical. Musical how? Sounded like a kid's piano playing Mary Had a Little Lamb, I think at least. It repeated a few times before going silent. Maybe radio signals bleeding through. I thought that at first too, but I haven't heard anything since. Maybe you have a fan out there that really wanted you to hear the rendition of a childhood favorite. If anyone knows I'm up here, I'm already in trouble. No one is scheduled to come out this way today. I wouldn't go speaking that out into the wider world, Gwen. Oh, I'm not alone. Pearl is here with me. We're attached at the hip, you know. Pearl was what she called her pistol. All of us carried something when we went out into the wild. In my civilian life, I'm not much of a gun guy. Out here, though, I understand that it's an important tool in my tool bag. Don't want to be cornered by a wild cat and not have something to scare it away. Oh, Pearl is a straight shooter after all. The best. Let me know if you hear anything, huh? My intuition is pecking at me. Roger. If it comes back, try to record some of it with your phone. Oh, that's a good idea. Sometimes we non-gifted Sandys stumble into one. I regret telling you that all the flippin' time, Pete. Sandy 5 out. Sandy 3 over and out. I hung up the microphone and walked over to the north-facing window. If the weather is clear, I can sometimes make out Tower 5 from here. It takes a minute to spot, but I always can because, as the old saying goes, there are no straight lines in nature. While not technically true, it's mostly true and a useful guide for spotters. The difference between Mother Nature and her wayward child, mankind. I scanned the horizon for anything out of the ordinary, but everything looked serene. This view never changes, but it also never disappoints. The number of hours that I've sat out on the catwalk just staring out at the natural world would astound you. To work as a ranger, you have to have not just a healthy fear and appreciation for the wild, but genuinely love it. I heard electronic squelches behind me and turned to see some of the lights on the cabin's two-way lighting up. I walked back over, picked up the handle, and spoke. Sandy 3, come back. Static broke through the speakers, but that was it. No words and no childhood songs, nothing but grating static. I waited a bit to see if anybody would respond, but after 2 minutes of staring at the speaker, I determined it was nothing. I kicked back in my chair and dove back into my paperback. 2 pages later, Gwen came back. Sandy 3, this is Sandy 5. I groaned as I sat back up and grabbed the microphone. And go for Sandy 3. Peter, do you see something in the sky? Northwest. Trailing the long, coiled cord behind me, I walked to the window and looked in the direction that she told me. I held my hand over my eyes to shield any glare, but I still didn't see anything. I pressed the button. Negative, can't see anything. What is it? I don't know, I was knitting and I heard something whoosh over the tower. Sometimes small planes zip closer than they should, but when I looked out I didn't see anything. At first. And then about 10 or so miles out, the sun reflected off of something silver in the sky. A chopper? Sometimes the fire guys do test runs on clear days. Nothing on the schedule. I tried raising them on the radio, but nobody responded. Well, that wasn't ideal. You want the fire brigade to answer a call. That goes double if you're surrounded by living firewood. A spark could start an inferno that could eat through the entire forest at a speed that would make your head spin. You want me to try to hail them? Yes, she said. Her usually firm voice wavered a little. Pete, this thing is just hovering in the sky. Sometimes they'll do a training run without informing us. It's rare, but it happens. That has to be it. It has to be. Has to be, she echoed. Give me a second, let me switch frequencies and call. I'll come right back. Sandy 5 out. I gave the sky another glance, but I didn't see anything hovering. I knew Gwen. She was as straight a shooter as Pearl. If she had said she saw something, she saw it. I flipped over to the fire emergency frequency and depressed the button. This is a National Forest Lookout Tower 5. Does anybody copy? Silence. I tried again and again, but nothing. I flipped to a few more frequencies and didn't get a reply. It was like they were ignoring us. I switched back to Gwen and filled her in. She wasn't happy. What the hell? What's going on? What if there's a fire? Is the thing still in the sky? Yeah, it's not moving. It feels like I'm being watched. What's the bearing on your Osborne? The Osborne is a fire detecting tool equipped within every cabin. It's used to determine a location relative to the tower. It swivels 360 degrees and has an accurate topographical map at its center. When you sight smoke, you line up the crosshairs and find the degrees along the side. It's accurate enough with one tower, but more so if other towers can center in and cross-reference each other. 329 degrees in 48 minutes, Gwen said. Let me know what you see. I moved the Osborne to the bearing and took a gander through the crosshairs. My eyes are trained to follow along the ridges, so it took a second for me to adjust to the sky. At first, I didn't see anything with my naked eye. Then I did notice the sun glint off something. Oh, Gwen, I see it. Barely, but there's something there. So I'm not crazy. Well, that remains to be seen. But with this, you're good. I don't like that I can't get through to fire and rescue. That's never happened before. Try your cell phone. Maybe you can reach them that way. I tried, no signal. I usually have a few bars out here, but not now. Always when you need it the most, right? Yeah, no kidding. Pete, this thing is dropping. Falling or landing. Both? It's a quick, controlled descent. You see it? I didn't. I had barely seen it in the air. If it was quickly falling out of the sky, I had no chance of seeing a thing. Negative. Crap, it just dipped behind the tree line. I'm filling out a smoke report. I don't know what else to do except to follow protocol. Let me try to give them a call on my phone. I had a signal earlier. Hold on. I pulled my phone out ready to dial, but noticed that I didn't have any service. It wasn't even roaming. Just blank, like the cell towers had been erased. I tried restarting my phone, but it didn't change anything. I don't have service either. I said into the two-way. Any changes over there? I heard Gwen hit the button to speak, but she didn't say a word. Instead, I listened to her handheld two-way radio click several times, and sure enough, the beginning of Mary Had a Little Lamb had started playing. Finally, she whispered, "Are you hearing this?" "I am." The song suddenly stopped, and a calm, almost robotic voice started to speak. Gwen and I stayed quiet as churchgoers as the voice said, 777 Alpha Omega 6, unknown, unknown, unknown. Repeat, 777 Alpha Omega 6, unknown, unknown, unknown. The voice stopped and my heart did as well. Seconds later, the tinny version of Mary Had a Little Lamb started playing again. What is that? Who is sending that out? It sounds like a code, like from a number station. Number station as in secret messages to spies. Those number stations. Spies or government officials, maybe. I'm just guessing. It could be someone's idea of a weird prank. Maybe it's the fire and rescue teams messing with us. Oh, I dated a guy in fire and rescue, Gwen said. They don't have an ounce of a sense of humor shared among them. I think this is legit and I think it's bad. It sounds like a warning and I don't think it's a coincidence it came after this thing showed up and landed. Gwen, we don't know what's going on. I think writing the report is a good idea. You want me to relay a message to the campsites? Get another ranger out there. Maybe you'll get lucky and Terry will get dispatched, I said, trying to lower the tension. Gwen may have sounded calm to the untrained ear, but I knew she was scared, or at the very least, unnerved. I was as well, but I didn't want to share that. She laughed, but it sounded like it was Texas two-stepping with crying. And do you know that he told me the other day that he thought, if given 6 months of training, he could make the Pro Bowler tour with nothing but alley balls? Maybe we should encourage it and give our ears a break. Actually, he said, I could throw cheese like a pissed-off Wisconsinite, Gwenny. She said, imitating his voice. That man has kids in college, Gwen, I said. That man watched 9/11 as it happened, she said. Oh, that's a good one. Our conversation was cut short when we both heard a low rumble and felt a slow-rolling earthquake shake our towers. I grabbed onto my table as the entire cabin rocked back and forth like a ship hit by a rogue wave. After what felt like 10 hours but was actually just 30 seconds, the shaking stopped. Gwen, are you okay? Jesus Christ, I think I heard something in the tower snap. What? I don't know, I was worried this whole thing was gonna fall over. Was that an earthquake? It felt like it. When the hell has there ever been an earthquake here? As I made a mental note to look up if this area had ever had a recorded earthquake, I noticed the trees about a mile out violently snap back and forth in a concentric circle, like someone had dropped a pebble in the water. The ring of shaking trees quickly spread out, and I felt the concussive wave before I heard it. Again, the tower shuddered from the blast. The northern window shattered, and bits of glass came flying inward. I ducked under the desk with the cabin two-way to avoid Swiss cheesing my body, but several of the shards caught my arm. I winced in pain as the glass bit into my flesh. Not wanting to bleed out, I ripped off the sleeve of my shirt and did my best to staunch the bleeding. Once the blast had passed, I shot up and turned to the southern window. You could physically see the concussive wave working its way through the trees toward the campsites. Gwen, are you good? No response. Gwen, please come back, over. Nothing. Panic started to set in. If she were near the epicenter of that blast, there was a good chance her tower could have collapsed. She could be hurt or well. I didn't want to think that. I tried a third time with no response. My personal two-way squawked. It was Harry calling. He sounded equally nervous and confused. Sandy 3, this is Grounder 1. What was that? I don't know. Are you safe? I think so, but I can't get a hold of Gwen. Oh, crap. Did you see anything, any smoke? She saw something hovering in the sky that went down near her tower. We tried reaching out to fire and rescue, but they didn't respond. Something was hovering in the sky. Did I hear that right? Affirmative. It went down or landed. We also heard a nod. The cabin's two-way started to chirp. I turned up the speakers and heard clicking and growling. At first it sounded random, but then I realized multiple things were clicking and growling. It was as if they were communicating with each other. There was a loud, high-pitched electronic squeal that made me slam my hands over my ears. It went on for 10 seconds, and I heard the rest of the glass in the cabin window crack but not fall. When it stopped, I uncovered my ears, but that still didn't chase away the cobwebs. It sounded like my head had been underwater. My ears were swimming. I shook my head and used my thumb to pump at the opening in my ear to help pop them. I heard Harry yelling into my personal two-way. He was jabbering, and I had a hard time making out what he was saying. I took a second, centered myself, and listened. Jesus, Peter, can you hear me? Copy. Christ on a bike, what took you so long to respond? I heard something on the cabin two-way. It sounded like someone clicking, or what I imagined crickets would sound like if they could talk. Crickets talking? Son, did you hit your head? The cabin's two-way speaker came back to life. More clicking, but this was deliberate, as if it was signaling to someone. It sounded familiar, and I had no idea how that was even possible. At first, I couldn't make out what it was, but then it dawned on me. It was parroting back, "Mary had a little lamb." "The hell?" I said, staring at the speaker. I glared at the little box, wishing it could transform into a TV screen and show me what was making that noise. And that's when I saw the object rise above the tree line and climb up into the blue sky. It waited a beat and then zipped towards me. "Oh no," I said, diving under the desk. At speeds I didn't think possible, the craft whooshed over the tower, making it rattle to the foundations. Harry was going nuts over my two-way, rambling about something, but I didn't pay it any attention. Instead, I ran out into my catwalk to see where this craft had gone to, if it was still even possible. As fast as it was traveling, it might be halfway around the world by now. As soon as I pushed open the door to the catwalk, the air around me felt heavy. It even made my moments slow like astronauts walking on the moon. I wondered if hopping would make me move quicker. I glanced up and everybody in my vision was wavy like when you see gas fumes in the daylight. There was nothing above me that I could see, but I knew it was there. That meant it would have to stop on a dime to be here. Nothing I knew could do that. From inside the cabin, the speaker started bleeding out feedback. At first, it was just noise, but it morphed into something that I had been hearing all day. "Mary had a little lamb." It made me realize that it was mirroring the message that it must have heard at the same time Gwen and I had. In an instant, the song stopped, and the air around me returned to normal. Whatever had been lingering around was gone. Harry was calling out from my personal two-way. I ran back inside and picked it up. "Peter, do you copy?" "Copy," I said. "Jesus, what's happening out there?" Before I could answer, my eyes flicked towards the north window, and I saw a thin ribbon of smoke in the horizon. It looked dangerously close to Gwen's tower. I felt my heart start to race. "Harry, there's smoke near Tower 5. I can't call Gwen, and fire and rescue aren't picking up." Say no more. I'll grab the UTV and head out. You have a bearing on the Osborne for me." I glanced up to where I had seen the curl of smoke, but an entire bolt of smoke had replaced the ribbon. Or honestly, more like a thick pea soup fog had stretched for about a mile and was still going. No fire spreads that quickly. It reminded me of those snake fireworks that always underwhelmed you as a kid. You light a small black circle and as it ignites, it expands. At best, it coiled until it became a puff of nothing and blew away in the breeze. At worst, it stopped coiling after about 10 seconds and left a burn mark on your driveway. I had no idea what was going on here. "Jesus, Harry, I don't know what this is, but I'm not sure it's a fire." "Where is it?" "Across the horizon," I said, "and it's growing." "What?" The cabin's two-way came to life. Through the speaker, we heard a pre-recorded message from the Secretary of Agriculture, the person who oversees all the national parks. In a calm and measured tone, they said, "Rangers, this is a code black warning. Please remain in place and do not interfere with any military officials who may arrive on scene. If there are civilians present, please inform them that they are to remain in place and cannot leave. Anyone found fleeing this location will be considered hostile and subject to severe punishments. Repeat, this is a code black warning. Stay in place and do not interfere with any military officials. Thank you for your cooperation." It came and went like a mid-afternoon storm. I wasn't sure what the smoke or fog was, but I was certain it wasn't just a quickly spreading forest fire. This was something different. A gas attack, a small-scale nuclear device, a dimensional rift. My mind was racing. Harry, what the hell is a code black? I got no idea. Why would they send out the military? Whatever the reason, it ain't good, kid. I gotta go get Gwen. If she's at the epicenter of this, who knows if she's still. He didn't finish, but we both knew what he meant. I had thought nothing but that since she had stopped responding. Yeah, go, just go, be safe, Harry. Oh, you know me, safety's my middle name. That and Big Dong. He said, trying to add levity to the tense situation. I gave Harry crap, but that was his true value. He cared about our well-being. I appreciated the attempt, but we were both too scattered to laugh. A grounder one out. I walked back out to the catwalk and stared out at the approaching fog. It was so thick that, as it slowly advanced, the trees would just disappear from view. I thought about Gwen and my guts twisted into pretzels. I had been concerned that the tower collapsed earlier, but now that seemed quaint. Was she still alive? Had whatever the code black warning entailed harmed her? The pace at which the fog was approaching was increasing. I'd reluctantly have answers to those questions before too long. I swallowed hard and ran my hands through my sweaty hair. I wanted to do something to help, but I had no idea what I could even do. Would the military arrive soon? Would I be pressed into service? The cabin's two-way started squawking again, and then I heard a familiar voice whisper through the speaker. Sandy 3, this is Sandy 5. Do you copy? Gwen. I ran back inside and nearly ripped the two-way off the wall by yanking on the microphone. Gwen, are you okay? What's going on? Peter, I can't say much. They may hear me. Who? The creatures in the fog. I fell back down on the ground. I had a hard time breathing. The what? There are dozens of them and they're multiplying. What are they? Shh, don't speak, she whispered. I hear some at the base of the tower. I held my breath, praying that she had closed and locked the access to the catwalk. If they went up into the tower, Gwen had nowhere to go. My heart raced and I felt like I might pass out. I drummed on the floor, praying that I would hear Gwen's voice again. They haven't figured out that I'm in here yet, she whispered. So far, they've stayed out of the tower. I wanted to respond, but I knew my voice coming out of her speaker would be a beacon that led to her. I stayed quiet. She had kept her finger depressed on the microphone button, and I could hear everything going on in her cabin. I wasn't sure if she had actually held it down or if she wanted to leave a record of what happened to her. I heard Gwen's heavy breathing and the occasional rustling of her clothes. I imagined she was tucked under the desk, the long cord trailing from the wall. Sweat beaded my forehead and poured down my face. Seconds later, I heard something that chilled me. It was the clicking and growling noises that I had heard earlier. There were dozens of different ones in the distance. These things had surrounded the tower. Jesus, I think I hear one on the stairs. Lock the catwalk door, Gwen. Please tell me you've locked it, I said to myself. As long as she had the microphone in her death grip, none of my messages would reach her. She was smart, and I was hoping she did the smart thing. Peter, I don't know what's going to happen, but thank you for always being nice to me. Tell Harry the same, dumb jokes and all. But between you and me, the man has personal knowledge of the country's mood during the 2008 housing crisis. Tears formed at the corners of my eyes, but I smiled. Yeah, good one, Gwen. I'm not saying this is goodbye. I still have Pearl with me, but in case, Jesus, there are more of them on the stairs now. She said, her voice lowering to the point where it was barely audible. I'm scared, Peter. I don't think these things are from. The radio cut off. No noise, no static. No connection with her two-way. I pressed the button and whispered, "Gwen, Gwen, can you hear me?" Silence. The cabin's two-way shorted out and died. I ran to my personal two-way but knew that I didn't have the range with it. She was alone, cut off from all humanity. I bolted up and ran to the catwalk. The curtain of fog was inching closer. I thought about Harry driving like a madman towards it with reckless abandon. He needed to turn back, but there was no way to reach him now. My heart ached. That man had a family. With nothing to do but prepare for the approaching wave, I locked the catwalk and moved the sparse furniture towards the open windows, not to stop them from coming but to slow them down in the hopes that the military might have a plan. I pulled out my handgun, loaded it, and watched the fog roll toward me. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if any of us will get out of this alive. I don't know if this can even be stopped. I turned to the southern approach, miles from the darkening fog, and admired the landscape. It really is pretty up here. Alright, a quick break from the story because I wanted to tell you about something that my partner has been absolutely obsessed with lately. Jones Road Beauty. Now I'll be honest, before this, makeup for her usually meant a long routine and stressing to get out the door in time. But she started using their Miracle Balm and I noticed the difference almost immediately. It doesn't cover her skin, it actually enhances it. It gives this really natural look, your skin but better glow, and she can literally apply it with just her fingers in under a minute. What she loves most is how simple it is. One product works as a blush, highlighter, and even a little lip tint, so her whole routine is way faster, especially on busy mornings or when we're heading out quickly. And everything from Jones Road Beauty is made with clean, skin-loving ingredients, so it looks natural and feels lightweight instead of heavy or clogging pores. They also just launched their new shadow stick, which she's been using non-stop. You just swipe it on, blend it with your finger, and you're done. No brushes, no mess, it's super easy. And it works for both everyday looks or something a little more dramatic. If you want modern day makeup that's clean, strategic, and multifunctional for effortless routines, for a limited time our listeners are getting a free shimmer face oil on their first purchase when they use code MrCreeps at checkout. Just head to jonesroadbeauty.com and use code MrCreeps at checkout. After you purchase, they will ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them that our show sent you. People say that isolation changes you. After 10 years perched in a 7x7 tower overlooking the Clearwater National Forest, I can tell you that they're right, but not in the ways you would expect. For decades, I've spent my summers scanning the horizon for smoke columns from a metal and glass box mounted atop a 100-foot tower miles away from civilization. Fire lookouts are a dying breed these days. Satellites, drones, and cameras have replaced most human eyes, but certain remote areas still rely on us. There is something about human intuition that technology hasn't replicated yet. What they don't tell you in training is that fire lookouts see a lot more than just fires. When you're responsible for 300,000 acres of wilderness with high-powered binoculars and nothing but time, you witness things that nobody was meant to see. These are some of those stories. My third season started normally enough. Late May when the snow had mostly melted, but before the real fire danger began. I was settling in for another summer of solitude. The helicopter dropped me and my supplies off that morning and I was unpacking when I spotted movement through my binoculars. About 4 miles southwest of my tower, a figure in red was moving along Porter Ridge Trail. Nothing unusual. Hikers were common in the area. I noted it in my log as standard procedure and continued organizing my supplies. 2 hours later, I spotted another hiker in blue heading down the same trail from the opposite direction. I watched idly as the two dots moved toward each other, eventually meeting at a small clearing that served as a rest area. Through the binoculars, I could see them talking. The red-jacketed hiker appeared to be a woman with a large backpack. The blue-jacketed one, a man with just a day pack. After about 15 minutes, they parted ways. The man in blue continued north and the woman in red headed south, or at least, that's what should have happened. But as I tracked them, something felt off. The man's posture had changed. His gait seemed different, heavier somehow, and he now had a large pack. I focused my binoculars more carefully. The woman was nowhere to be seen. Training kicks in during moments like this. I radioed down to the ranger station. Possible incident on Porter Ridge Trail. I reported, giving coordinates. 2 hikers met at approximately 1400 hours. Only one continued. Request welfare check. The rangers said they would send somebody out first thing in the morning. It was already getting dark and the trail was a good 3-hour hike from the nearest road. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the binoculars trained on that section of forest, even using the night vision scope that we were equipped with for tracking lightning strikes. Nothing moved except nocturnal wildlife. The next day, 2 rangers hiked in. I watched them search the clearing and surrounding area throughout the morning. Around noon, my radio crackled. Lookout 1, this is Ranger Davis, come in. Go ahead, Ranger Davis. We found a hiking pole and what appears to be dried blood on some rocks just off trail near the meeting point. No sign of the hiker or the backpack. We're calling in search and rescue and law enforcement. Keep your eyes open for any movement in this quadrant. For the next week, the forest below me swarmed with search teams and eventually FBI agents. They found more blood, scattered personal items, but never the woman. What they did find hidden beneath a pile of rocks half a mile away was a small cache containing items from 3 different missing hikers from the previous 2 years. 6 weeks later, they arrested a man in Spokane. He had been using credit cards belonging to the missing woman. In his storage unit, they found her backpack along with belongings from 5 other people who had disappeared in national forests across the Northwest over the past 3 years. The case made national news briefly. The papers called him the Trail Killer. He eventually confessed to 8 murders, all in wilderness areas, all careful ambushes of solo hikers in isolated locations. What they didn't report was how he was caught. A fire lookout, somebody whose job was to watch for smoke, had instead witnessed a killer at work. I testified at his trial, but they never made public that I had seen the encounter, and for safety reasons, I was grateful for that. It was the fall of my 4th year. The fire season was winding down, but I had agreed to stay on an extra month to monitor a controlled burn project. The aspen leaves had turned gold, and the air had that crisp edge that signaled winter's approach. Standard procedure for fire lookouts is to note any human activity in the forest during high-risk periods. I had been tracking a group of 4 hunters for 2 days as they moved through a remote section about 6 miles northeast of my tower. Legal hunting season had just begun and their orange vests made them easy to spot from a distance. On the 3rd morning, I noted that they had split into 2 pairs. Nothing unusual, standard hunting practice. The first pair headed north along a game trail while the other 2 moved east toward Blacktail Creek. I made periodic checks on both groups throughout the morning. Around 2 p.m., I saw a muzzle flash from the eastern pair's location, followed by the distant pop of a rifle shot a moment later. A successful hunt, I presumed. I watched as they appeared to field dress something, though the distance and tree cover made details impossible to discern. By 4 p.m., as shadows lengthened, both hunting pairs converged again at their camp. I did one final sweep of the area before darkness fell, noting nothing unusual. The next morning, I couldn't locate the hunters. their camp seemed abandoned. I assumed that they had packed out early, perhaps having gotten what they came for. I made a note and moved on to my regular fire monitoring duties. 3 days later, my radio came alive with urgent chatter. A search and rescue operation was being mobilized. 2 hunters had emerged from the wilderness reporting that their companions were missing. Last coordinates were near Blacktail Creek, the ranger coordinator was saying. They separated 2 days ago and never returned to camp. My blood ran cold. I broke in on the channel. Lookout 1 here. I had visual on that hunting party 3 days ago. Observed what happened to be a successful hunt near Blacktail Creek. All 4 hunters had returned to camp by nightfall. A long pause followed. Lookout 1, please confirm. You witnessed all 4 hunters at camp after the split. Affirmative. 2 pairs separated in the morning, both returned by dusk. Another pause. That contradicts the survivors' report. They claim they waited overnight before hiking out to report that their friends were missing. I reviewed my detailed logbook with the search coordinator. The timestamps, locations, and movements that I had recorded didn't match what these survivors had reported. Law enforcement was brought in. The 2 survivors were separated and questioned, and their stories fell apart within hours. The truth emerged in pieces. What I had witnessed wasn't a deer hunt. The muzzle flash that I saw was one hunter shooting another over a dispute. His partner was killed trying to intervene. The killers had returned to camp, packed up before dawn, and fabricated the story about their friends getting lost. When investigators searched the area that I had directed them to, they found 2 shallow graves. Without my observations from the tower, the murders might have been written off as a wilderness mishap. 2 hunters lost, presumed dead or missing. The prosecuting attorney later told me that my fire tower log, with its timestamps and coordinates, had been the main evidence that they had used against the other hunters. My 6th season brought the case that still haunts me the most. A family of 4 had been camping at Eagle Lake about 5 miles west of my tower, a beautiful spot very popular with families. The parents had reported their 8-year-old son missing around 11 a.m. He had apparently wandered off while they were breaking down camp. By noon, my tower was serving as a coordination point for these search efforts due to our radio equipment and vantage point. I had been asked to direct my full attention to the area, tracking search teams and watching for any sign of the boy. From my elevation, I could see the lake and surrounding forest. 12 search teams were methodically combing the area in a standard grid pattern. 2 boats patrolled the lakeshore. A helicopter was en route from Missoula. At 3:48 p.m., I spotted something off. About a mile north of the lake, well away from where these search teams were concentrating, I caught a flash of movement that didn't match the pattern of other searchers. Through my binoculars, I saw what appeared to be an adult figure moving quickly through the forest, holding on to something. I radioed in immediately. Possible sighting 1 mile north of the lake, moving northeast. Adult figure carrying something child-sized. 2 search teams were redirected to intercept. I kept my binoculars fixed on the figure, directing the teams via radio. Subject moving faster now, crossing the dry creek bed, heading toward the old logging road. The search teams closed in. Through my binoculars, I watched as they intercepted the figure, a man carrying a bundled tarp. The radio crackled with urgent voices and then went silent. 20 minutes later, Lookout 1, child recovered, alive, suspect in custody. The full story emerged that evening. The man that they had caught was a previously convicted offender who had been working as a campground host under a false identity. He had been watching the family and waiting for an opportunity. When the parents were distracted with packing, he lured the boy away with stories about seeing a little bear cub. His plan had been to take the child to a prepared location deep in the forest, a small cabin off the old logging road that investigators later found stocked with food, restraints, and other items that I don't care to describe. If the boy had made it to that cabin, search teams might have never found him. The area was outside of the standard search radius, in terrain that would have masked any cries for help. What haunts me isn't just the evil I witnessed, but how easily it might have succeeded. If I hadn't happened to be scanning that particular section at that exact moment, if the angle of sunlight hadn't caught my attention, if I had been focusing anywhere else as was originally planned. The boys' parents came to my tower later that summer, just thanking me for what I had done. I didn't tell them how close it had been, how many nightmares that I had had since. Instead, I showed their other child, a wide-eyed 6-year-old girl, how to use the firefinder to pinpoint locations in the forest below. And for that short moment, it helped me take my mind off of things. The man is now serving 3 consecutive life sentences. It should be more. My job came with protocols for all sorts of emergencies. Fires, lost hikers, injured climbers, and so on. What it didn't prepare me for was becoming the eyes for a federal manhunt. The summer of my 7th season on the job, 2 inmates had escaped from the state penitentiary about 80 miles south of my forest. The FBI believed that they had fled north into the wilderness with help from outside sources. For 3 days, my normal fire spotting duties were supplemented with scanning for unusual human movement. On day 4, I noticed something at the eastern edge of my viewpoint. A vehicle unusual because it was on a maintenance road that was supposed to be closed to the public. Through my binoculars, I could make out a dark green SUV parked where the road ended at a trailhead. I reported it and was told to monitor but not approach. Obviously, I had no intention of leaving my tower, but the instruction reflected the tension of the situation. Hours passed by, and as sunset approached, I spotted movement near the vehicle. 2 men emerged from the forest, moving with an urgency that seemed suspicious even from miles away. They appeared to be loading something heavy into the back of the SUV. I radioed it in, providing coordinates and a description. The response was immediate. Multiple agencies were converging on the location from different access points. They were still 30 to 45 minutes out at a minimum. I was asked to maintain observation and report any updates. Things escalated quickly. A 3rd person appeared, a woman who had apparently been waiting in the driver's seat. The men got in and the SUV began moving back down the maintenance road. A vehicle on the move, I reported, heading south. What followed was the most surreal hour of my lookout career. From my position, I could track the vehicle's dust cloud as it navigated the winding forest road. I became the eyes for a pursuit that was still assembling, relaying turns and estimated speeds to officers racing to intercept. They've turned west onto the old logging road, moving very quickly. The dust suggests that they may have missed the curve near Miller Creek. Vehicle stopped briefly. It's moving again now. Slower now, possibly damaged. The FBI later told me that my real-time narration was being relayed to over 30 law enforcement vehicles converging from different locations. My vantage point allowed them to set up roadblocks at optimal spots, effectively creating a net that tightened around the fugitives. The SUV eventually attempted to use a dry creek bed as an off-road escape, something visible to me but not to those on the ground. My warning allowed officers to change their positions, and the fugitives drove right into a waiting roadblock. The 2 escaped inmates were captured along with the woman who was the sister of one of them. In the SUV, authorities found weapons, stolen cash, and forged documents for crossing into Canada. After the suspects had been detained, one of the FBI agents on the ground came up to me to thank me. He explained that the fugitives had been hiding in a remote cabin in the forest, and what I had seen them loading into the SUV was their supplies for the next phase of their escape. If they had made it out of the forest before law enforcement had consolidated their positions, they might have disappeared completely. "You ever consider a career change?" he asked, only half joking. "We could use somebody with your observation skills on the squad." I told him that I preferred the company of trees and wildlife to fugitives, but I thanked him again for the opportunity. Not all of the stories that I have for my job involved crimes in progress. Sometimes the horror of it all was more subtle and more personal. It was late August and the summer had been brutally hot, with numerous lightning-caused fires keeping me constantly vigilant. I was exhausted, running on too little sleep and too much coffee. Around sunset, I spotted a lone hiker on the trail that led directly to my tower. This wasn't entirely unusual. Some hikers made fire lookout towers their destination, hoping to chat with the occupant or simply enjoy the view. But official visiting hours had ended and the trail was a challenging 3-hour climb even in the daylight. I radioed down to the ranger station to check if anybody had registered for an overnight hike to the lookout. They confirmed that nobody had, but suggested it might be a day hiker who had lost track of time. They advised me to lock my trapdoor as a precaution, and said that they would send somebody to check it first light if I was concerned. As darkness fell, I watched the hiker's headlamp slowly zigzagging up the switchbacks towards my tower. Standard protocol was to assist any hikers in distress, but also to maintain security, especially after hours. I decided to hail the hiker over my external speaker once they got closer. "Hey there, the lookout tower is closed to visitors after sunset. Can I help you with something?" The headlamp stopped moving. After a long pause, a voice called back, "Lane, is that you up there?" A chill ran through me. The voice was familiar, but I couldn't immediately place it. "Who's asking?" I responded, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's me, Vince. Vince Caraway from Durango." My blood went cold. Vincent had been my neighbor in Colorado 6 years and several hundred miles away from where I now stood. We had been close friends, but had a falling out that ended up pretty badly. Like, very badly. I had to file a restraining order against him, and it was still active as far as I knew. "You need to turn around and head back down," I said firmly. "The ranger station has been notified of your presence." A laugh floated up from the darkness. "No, they haven't, Lane. I checked in with them this morning. Told them that I was your cousin coming for a surprise visit. They gave me detailed directions." My hand shook as I reached for the radio, but I hesitated. If what he said was true, the night staff might not realize that something was wrong, and if he was lying, calling now might provoke him. "I've been looking for you for a long time," he continued, his voice closer now. He must have resumed climbing while we spoke. "Did you really think a restraining order would stop me? That moving to another state would be enough. I always told you that we were meant to be together." I grabbed my satellite phone, the emergency backup we used when radio communications were down. As I punched in the direct number for the sheriff's department, I heard the distinctive sound of the metal rungs on the tower's ladder being used. He was climbing up. The satellite call connected and I hurriedly explained the situation. They promised to dispatch units immediately, but the nearest help was at least 45 minutes away. My tower, like most fire lookouts, had a trapdoor entrance in the floor that could be locked from inside. I slammed it shut and secured the heavy bolt just as I heard him reach the platform below. "Lane, don't be like this," he called, his voice now directly beneath me. "I came all this way. I've been planning this reunion for months." The banging started. First, he tried the trapdoor, rattling it violently against the bolt, and then he moved to the windows, testing each one. I backed into the corner with my bear spray in one hand and a flare gun in the other. For the next 30 minutes, he alternated between trying to break in and delivering long, rambling monologues about our relationship and the future that he still believed we would have together. His voice shifted between tender pleading and rage. "They'll never find your body out here," he hissed during one of his darker moments. I looked it up. "Do you know how many people go missing in national parks every year? They'll think that you've wandered off, got lost, maybe fell from your own tower." And then almost tenderly, "But it doesn't have to be that way. We can still fix this. Just open the door, Lane." When the sheriff's helicopter spotlight finally illuminated the tower, the relief was so intense that I nearly collapsed. They found the trapdoor bolt partially sawed through. He had been working on it methodically with a tool of some kind. In his backpack, they found duct tape, zip ties, and a hunting knife, and printouts of my work schedule and the tower location. He had been planning this for a while. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had taken this lookout job partly because of him. Seeking isolation and distance after his stalking had my life in Colorado unbearable. And now that very isolation had nearly cost me my life. I finished the season with a deputy stationed at the base of my tower, and the following year I requested assignment to a different lookout in another forest. They never told Vince which one. Fire lookouts exist primarily to spot wildfires before they grow large enough to threaten lives and property. Most fires start out small, a tendril of smoke, a glowing spark, and we're trained to locate them precisely using specialized equipment. Early detection can mean the difference between a controllable burn and a catastrophic inferno. But in my 9th season, I encountered a fire that defied explanation. It began with a column of smoke rising from an area about 12 miles southeast of my tower. I pinpointed it using my Osborne firefinder, calling in the coordinates and watching as the initial attack crew was dispatched. Standard procedure executed countless times before. 4 hours later, the incident commander radioed with a puzzling report. "We've completed 3 sweeps of the target area. There's no sign of fire, smoke, or hotspots. Are you certain of your coordinates?" I rechecked my measurements. Affirmative. Smoke column visible now at bearing 142 degrees, approximately 12.3 miles from the lookout. "That's the exact area that we've been searching," he replied, confusion evident in his voice. "I'm standing there now and there's nothing here." I could see the crew's vehicles through my binoculars, tiny dots in the location that I had specified, and rising just beyond them, a distinct column of dark smoke. "The smoke is visible from my position directly beyond your current location," I insisted, continuing to rise and now approximately 200 feet high. What followed was increasingly tense radio communication as we tried to reconcile what I was seeing with what the ground crew was reporting. They sent up a drone with thermal imaging. Nothing. They spread out in a wider search pattern. Nothing. Yet the smoke column remained visible from my tower, growing larger by the hour. By evening, additional resources had been called in, including a helicopter with specialized detection equipment. They flew directly through where I reported seeing the smoke. Nothing. I was beginning to question my own sanity when the helicopter pilot radioed. "Lookout 1, we're getting some unusual electromagnetic readings from this location. No heat signature, no visible smoke from your position, but something's interfering with our instruments when we fly through the coordinates that you provided." That night, unable to sleep, I monitored the smoke through my night vision equipment. It had taken on an eerie bluish glow in the infrared spectrum, pulsing slightly in a way that felt deliberate. The next morning, a specialized team arrived from a government agency that the ranger's supervisor would only identify as a research division. They established a perimeter around the area and asked me to maintain communication blackout regarding my observations. For 3 days, they worked at the site while I watched from my tower. The smoke remained visible only to me and apparently whatever instruments they had brought. On the 4th day, it disappeared as suddenly as it had appeared. The research team packed up and left. No explanation was provided. When I pressed my supervisor, he simply said, "Some things around here don't have explanations, Lane. It's best to focus on the fires that we can fight." 2 weeks later, I received a visit from a woman who identified herself only as Dr. Marlowe. She showed credentials from a department that I didn't recognize, and asked to review my logs from the incident. After reading through my detailed reports, she closed the logbook and fixed me with an intent gaze. Have you observed any other anomalous smoke patterns during your tenure? Something in her tone made me hesitate. Well, define anomalous. Smoke that behaves contrary to natural wind patterns. Columns that appear and disappear rapidly. Colors that seem unusual. I thought carefully before responding. There had been other incidents over the years, brief strange sightings that I had dismissed as tricks of the light or fatigue, but I had never logged them officially. Nothing significant, I said finally. She studied me for a long moment and then handed me a card with just a phone number. If you do observe anything unusual in the future, I would appreciate a direct call, day or night. Before leaving, she paused at the door. You have an exceptional gift for observation. Your logs helped us tremendously, but sometimes for your own well-being, it might be better not to see everything. I never saw Dr. Marlowe again. The card she gave me is still tucked in my field guide, though I've never used it. Some questions are better left unasked, especially when you're alone in a tower with nothing but your thoughts and the vast wilderness below. My final season as a lookout brought the incident that ultimately led to my resignation. It began with radio interference, static and fragmented voices bleeding through on frequencies that should have been empty. At first, I assumed it was ordinary atmospheric disruption or some equipment malfunction. I reported it to technical services and I continued with my duties. The interference grew worse over the following days. Fragments became more coherent. Snippets of conversations, dispatches, and what sounded like emergency calls. None of it matched the standard communications from our district. One night, unable to sleep due to a thunderstorm rolling through my sector, I noticed the radio activating on its own. Instead of static, a clear voice came through. Require immediate assistance. Multiple casualties. Cannot contain the situation. Repeat, we cannot. The transmission cut off abruptly. I attempted to respond, identifying myself and requesting clarification, but received only static in return. I logged the incident and reported it the next morning, providing the exact time and as much of the message as I could recall. The communications specialist seemed oddly unsurprised. We've had similar reports from 3 other lookouts in the region, she admitted reluctantly. It's always at night, always on the frequencies we don't use. We're working on a technical solution. But the transmissions continued, becoming more frequent and more disturbing. Some appeared to be standard emergency responses to fires or rescues, but with details that didn't match any incidents in our forest. Others contained technical jargon and code words that I did not recognize. The most unsettling pattern emerged about a week later. The transmissions began to reference specific coordinates within my observation area. I plotted them on my map and realized that they formed a rough circle around a remote section that contained nothing of note. No trails, no structures, not even any particular geographical features. Curiosity got the better of me. During my next supply delivery, I asked the ranger about the area. His reaction was immediate and strange. That section is off limits for environmental recovery, he said too quickly. Nothing there but some sensitive habitat restoration work. But there was something in his expression, a flicker of recognition, then concern that told me he was lying. That night, the radio activated at precisely 2:57 a.m. The voice was different this time, female, professional, but with an undercurrent of urgency. Containment breach in Sector 7. All personnel evacuate to minimum safe distance. Hazard protocols in effect. Repeat, containment breach. Static again. But this time when I looked out my east-facing window, I saw something that made my blood freeze. A faint blue glow pulsed from precisely the area indicated by those mysterious coordinates. Protocol demanded I report it immediately as a possible fire, but something stopped me. Perhaps the memory of the smoke incident from the previous year. or the ranger's strange reaction to my question. Instead, I used my personal camera to document the glow, which lasted approximately 8 minutes before fading away. The next morning, I carefully reviewed the images. The blue light appeared to emanate from the ground in a perfect circle, rising perhaps 50 feet into the air before dissipating. When I checked my map again, I noticed something that I had overlooked, a small notation that was barely visible on my Forest Service map. The claim name was simply listed as Project Riptide. That afternoon, I hiked to a ridge that would give me a better view of the area, though still keeping me several miles from the actual site. Through my binoculars, I could see no evidence of any environmental restoration work. What I did see, partially concealed by the natural terrain, was a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire, and what appeared to be small camouflaged monitoring stations. I took more photos, increasingly uneasy about what I was documenting. That night, the radio transmissions changed in tone. Multiple voices speaking rapidly and with clear alarm. Containment failing on levels 3 and 4. Cannot verify status of Research Team 5. Recommend immediate activation of the Tide Protocol. And most disturbingly, be advised, surface observations may be compromised. Lookout towers in potential observation range. The blue glow appeared again, stronger this time, pulsing in a rhythm that felt almost like a heartbeat. I made a decision. Using my satellite phone rather than the radio, I called the number that Dr. Marlowe had given me the past year. It was answered on the first ring. When I identified myself and began describing what I was witnessing, the voice on the other end cut me off. Cease observation immediately. Close all blinds and power down all electronic equipment except this phone. A team is on its way to your location. Arrival in 40 minutes. Do not communicate with anybody else. I followed the instructions, my hands shaking as I pulled the blinds and shut down my equipment. The next 40 minutes were the longest of my life, sitting alone in the darkness, jumping at every creak and groan that the tower made in the wind. When they arrived, it wasn't by helicopter or vehicle, but on foot. A team of 6 individuals in unmarked tactical gear who simply appeared out of the darkness. They brought specialized equipment that they immediately began setting up around my tower, and Dr. Marlowe was among them. Her first words to me weren't an explanation but a question instead. Have you experienced any unusual symptoms? Headaches, disorientation, a loss of time? When I said no, the relief on her face was palpable. Good, that's very good. What followed was a debriefing unlike anything that I had experienced. They reviewed my photos, notes, and recollections with intense interest. They asked questions about every transmission that I had heard, every observation that I had made up until that point. Finally, Dr. Marlowe sat across from me, her expression grave. What I'm about to tell you is very classified. You'll be asked to sign documents to that effect before we leave. But you deserve to know what you've witnessed. She confirmed that there was a research facility in the location that I had identified, established back in the 1950s, to study something discovered in the surrounding area. She wouldn't specify what that something was, only that it had properties that defied conventional science. The radio transmissions that you've been receiving, she explained carefully, they're not coming from our facility, at least not from our facility now. I struggled to understand her meaning. Then where are they coming from? Her answer chilled me to my core. Our working theory is that they're transmissions from the faculty at different points in time, past and possibly future incidents bleeding through due to the unique properties of what's being contained there. The blue light, she explained, indicated a fluctuation in those containment measures. My observation and documentation had provided them with valuable data that they couldn't get from their instruments alone. Human perception sometimes detects things that our technology misses. It's why lookout towers still exist when satellites could theoretically replace them. Before leaving, she offered me a choice: sign their confidentiality agreements and accept a reassignment to a different lookout tower far from this location, or resign from the service entirely with a generous separation package. Either way, she added, I don't recommend your return to this particular post. The effects of long-term exposure to these phenomena are not well understood. I chose to resign. The decision wasn't difficult. After a decade of watching the wilderness, I had seen too much, not just of the unexplained but of human darkness as well. It was time to return to the world below, to streets and buildings and people. After leaving the lookout service, I tried to build back a normal life in Missoula. I took a job at the university library, rented a small apartment, and attempted to readjust to living among people rather than trees. For the most part, I did pretty well. The nightmares about my adventures and what I had witnessed had gradually faded away. I made some friends and even got back to dating a little bit. But 6 months after my resignation, the past came calling back. It was a Tuesday night in late March. I had just returned from work, juggling groceries and my keys at the door when I noticed an envelope had been slipped under my door. No postmark, no address, just my name handwritten on the front. Inside was a single sheet of paper containing a short, typewritten message and a small key. A matter has arisen concerning your former lookout tower that requires your attention. The enclosed key opens storage locker 17 at Westside Self-Storage on Brook Street. Inside, you'll find materials relevant to your interests. We recommend going alone. A colleague of Dr. M. My first instinct was to call the number that Dr. Marlowe had given me, but I hesitated. Whoever had delivered this note likely had connections to our organization. If they were communicating this way rather than directly, there might be a reason. And curiosity won out. I drove to the storage facility that evening, found Unit 17 and used the key. Inside was a single cardboard box containing a laptop computer, an envelope, and a sealed plastic case labeled Recorded Evidence, Beartooth Lookout, 2023 to 2024. The envelope contained a letter from Dr. Marlowe herself. Lane, if you're reading this, I've been able to contact you through official channels. After your departure, we continued monitoring the area near your lookout. What we discovered has raised concerns that I believe you should be aware of. The laptop contains footage from cameras that we installed around your tower after you left. The plastic case holds audio recordings from equipment designed to capture the kind of transmissions that you reported. I'm breaking protocol by sharing this with you, but I believe you've earned the right to know. More importantly, you may be the only person who can interpret what we found. Be careful who you trust with this information. Marlowe. I brought everything home, closed my blinds, and powered up the laptop. It required a password, and on a hunch, I tried Riptide. The screen unlocked. The laptop contained hundreds of video files organized by date. I started with the earliest, recorded just 1 week after my departure. The footage showed my former lookout tower from various angles, empty, waiting for the next season's occupant. Nothing unusual appeared in the first dozen files. Just the tower standing there, buffeted by winter storms, occasionally visited by the wildlife. But in a file dated January 17th, something changed. The timestamp read at 2:57 in the morning, the exact time that I had received the most disturbing radio transmissions. The footage showed the tower exterior illuminated by the same blue glow that I had witnessed. But this time there was something else. A figure standing on the observation deck. The image was grainy, captured from a distance, but clear enough to send a chill through me. The figure appeared to be using the Osborne Firefinder, moving it methodically, exactly as I would have done when scanning for smoke. Except the tower was supposed to be empty. The season had ended. Nobody should have been there. I fast-forwarded through the footage. The figure appeared again on multiple nights, always at that same time and always following the same pattern, scanning with the firefinder, making notes, and using the radio. A perfect mimicry of a lookout's duties. In the final video, dated just 1 week before I received the envelope, the camera angle shifted slightly, capturing the figure more clearly as it stood at the railing. My hands trembled as I paused the video and zoomed in. The figure was me, or somebody wearing my face. I moved to the audio files next. Most contained the same type of fragmented transmissions that I had heard during my final season. Urgent communications about containment breaches, casualty reports, evacuation orders. But one file recorded 3 days after the last video was different. A voice, my voice, speaking clearly without static or interruption. This is Lookout 1. I am observing multiple anomalies across all sectors. The breach has expanded beyond containment parameters. Timeline collapse imminent. To whoever receives this, I can see you watching. I can see what follows you. They are using your eyes. Close them while you still can. The file ended with a burst of static and what sounded like somebody screaming. I sat in my darkened apartment staring at the screen, trying to process what I had seen and heard. The voice was unmistakably mine, yet I had no memory of ever speaking those words. The figure in the tower moved exactly as I would have moved, used the equipment exactly as I would have used it. At the bottom of the box, I found one final item that I had initially overlooked. A small sealed envelope with, "Only if confirmed," written on it in Dr. Marlowe's handwriting. Inside was a brief note and a newspaper clipping. The clipping was an obituary dated 2 months in the future. My obituary. Cause of death, exposure after becoming lost on a hiking trail in the Clearwater National Forest. A trail that would take me near my former lookout tower. Dr. Marlowe's note was equally disturbing. Elaine, if you're reading this, you've confirmed what we feared. Our working theory. What we're containing isn't just affecting communications. It's creating temporal duplications. Echoes of people who spent significant time near the containment zone. The entity in your tower is not from the past. We believe it's you from a possible future, one that we hope to prevent. The enclosed clipping was discovered in the faculty archives in a file dated for 2026. We don't know how it got there. We don't know if this future is fixed or mutable. What we do know is this. Do not return to the forest under any circumstances. Do not attempt to contact your doppelganger. Most importantly, if you begin experiencing a loss of time or find yourself doing things you don't remember doing, call the emergency number below immediately. I'm sorry to have involved you further. I thought you deserved to know what might be coming for you. M. That was 3 weeks ago, and I've since moved to a different city, changed my name, and taken measures to ensure that I can't be easily located. I avoid looking out windows for too long. I've covered all the mirrors in my new apartment, and I've stopped using binoculars or telescopes of any kind. But sometimes, usually around 3 a.m., I wake with the certainty that somebody is watching me through eyes that are not quite their own. Watching me from a vantage point high above, where the air is thin and the view stretches for hundreds of miles in every direction. Our plane cropped over the horizon. The endless woods meandering and covering every inch of land for miles around the forested area, effectively isolating it from the rest of the earth by mountains on almost all sides. Within the bowl-shaped valley of greenery, it was easy to spot where we were headed. The blackened tower stood out like an altar of ash amid the lush firs. As we got closer, a memory flashed in my head about the conversation I had had with the chief forest officer, Vince Wesley, only the day before in Ontario. The incident happened over the winter break. A couple of blokes from Cali came in to do the watchman duty for some extra cash. Probably needed it for the holidays, and heaven's sakes, you know we've been short-handed lately. Nate, it's not like I had a choice. I figured they would basically be holed up in that tower for a couple of weeks with nothing to do but whack off and smoke weed or whatever. They seemed harmless. So then what happened? I remembered asking. Paul says that it was arson. I thought it was an accident. I guess that's why we called you, huh? Ain't you the expert? I didn't bother telling him that it had been about 4 years since I had been involved in any official investigation like this. Truth be told, I was a little like those kids, eager for cash and down on my luck. Since this seemed like an open and shut case, I thought I would be here for a day at the most. Slowly, we declined towards the south part of the lake shore, the plane gliding gracefully across the top of the morning fog, as I got a better look at the fire watch station. It surprised me to see how much it was still standing. From this angle at least, half of the building looked like it was untouched, perhaps more. Built of steel and stone and a mix of cement and wood. It should have collapsed if the fire was as intense as Vince had claimed it to be, especially if it had started from within. As the seaplane came to a stop, I stopped an officer coming to meet me. His smile was friendly, but a few bruises and a cast on his knee told me that the older man hadn't had a very pleasant Christmas. "You must be the Inspector Nathan, right?" he said as he leaned on his good leg. "Yeah, just call me Nate. Sorry it took a little longer than expected to get here. Hard to find a pilot that wants to fly this time of year, I guess." I told him as I gathered my things. I hadn't packed much again, expecting this to be a short trip since the station itself was not much larger than an average 2-bedroom cabin. Not even a change of clothes. "Nah, it's this place. Nobody likes to come up to Sentinel Peak. They say it's got bad mojo," he teased. I pointed toward the abandoned lookout and commented, "Given recent events, I can't blame them." We stood there for an awkward moment while he peered up toward the stairwell that led to the main lookout, perhaps speculating what had happened. And then he clasped his hands together and helped with my backpack. "Well, the tower ain't going nowhere. Let me show you where you'll be staying," he said. The seaplane captain waved us off and then we were alone. As I watched its reflection disappear from the surface of the water, I realized just how alone we were. The valley seemed endless. The sky was so quiet, and the tower suddenly seemed a bit more imposing as I stood there at its feet. "Have you been up there since it happened?" I asked. "What? Oh, heck no. We needed to preserve the crime scene and all that," he immediately shouted. I nodded absently, wondering why I had even considered he might have any information to give me. So I pulled my pack a little closer to me and followed him down a winding trail toward what looked like a small recreational vehicle. Best we could do given the circumstances. Honestly, Sentinel Peak is a pretty lonely place, so besides this lookout, there ain't much up here," he explained as he led me inside. There were 2 small beds, a few cabinets, a mini kitchen and toilet, and maybe enough food for a few days. "I don't really think that I'm going to be here for that long," I told him as he offered me a cup of coffee. "Sure, but this is better than being outside. Bears in these parts get hungry this time of year since there's not much else in the area to eat. They get a little desperate," he commented. We both pulled up a chair and I got the feeling that if I was going to get this investigation done, it would require that I cooperated with him. "So, the bodies, will that attract bears too?" I asked. "There weren't any bodies, mate. I guess that whoever did it hightailed it out of here after the deed was done," he explained. "I thought they died in the incident," I said, recalling what Vince had told me. "If they did, then the fire ate them up, I guess. But people go missing around here pretty often," he said, sipping his hot beverage. Something about what he was telling me didn't add up, so I decided to change the subject. You mentioned earlier not many people come here, right? So, what's the lookout tower even for? There's a lumber company a few miles east of here in the valley. Well, I guess there was one until a few years back. Everything with the pandemic didn't pass us by and the company fell into bankruptcy, he answered. So it's just sitting there untouched. They left all of their equipment behind. That's what seems to happen around here. People come and try to make this area theirs, and Mother Nature fights back, pushes us back. I've often felt like we weren't welcome here. There's a force that doesn't want us here, he said. I sat there for an awkward moment as he stared at me stone-faced, and then he laughed. I really had you going there for a second, didn't I? I sighed and looked down at the coffee, realizing that I didn't really feel comfortable being here longer than necessary. I think I'm going to go up to the lookout now, see what I can find out, I said as I stood up and stretched. Sure, but it's gonna get dark soon. I can get some pork and beans going if you want first. Maybe warm that up in about an hour. By then, I should have this wrapped up, I said as I walked out of the small mobile home. The air around me felt still, and I walked up the trail toward the tower, my imagination playing out what I might find. As I took a first step onto the wooden stairwell, the entire lookout made a creaky noise and I froze for a moment, wondering how secure this place was. It didn't look too unstable, but it didn't make me feel safe when every step I made caused more noise to resound through the valley. As I climbed above the tree line, it felt like I was going into the clouds, getting a chance to see the forest from a different view. Here at this level, it was an ocean of firs and pines, easy to get lost in, or drown in the endless green. The signs of the fire became evident when I made the next round of stabs, some of them bent and warped by the flames. And then it got worse at the next level, turning completely to black ash as I reached the top. The door was barely on its hinges, the gentle breeze inviting me to go in and to see what had occurred. I took out my smartphone to get a good bit of light as I saw the sun was beginning to set over the forest, and I went in. The smell of ash mixed with burnt flesh as my tiny light illuminated the destruction. There really wasn't a part of the small building that hadn't been completely burnt up by the fire. Books and furniture were blackened or completely disintegrated. The metal chairs were melted and twisted, the computers broken and leaning toward the center of the room. It seemed clear the fire had started there, near where a small coffee table had once sat. In its place now, there was a deep scar that seemed to infect the very ground, a dark black spot that spread out its tentacles in all directions. Yet then, as I turned toward the other side of the firewatch, I realized that most of it was untouched, as though the flames had mysteriously stopped when reaching a certain intensity. The couch was sitting there, looking toward the inferno as though entertained by the immolation, and beyond it, the kitchen looked perfectly intact. Why hadn't the volunteers simply used this as their exit strategy? I wondered as I stepped toward the tiny restroom and saw where one of them had spent their final few moments. The corpse was darker than the starry sky that was meshing with the old building. His body collapsed and hugging the toilet as though he had been vomiting. Yet the appearance of his body, frozen now by the after effects of the inferno, did not indicate that this man was hiding here and hoping to remain safe from the blaze. Instead, it told me that whatever had happened was swift, so unexpected that they didn't even have time to protect their body, as they had hurled into the porta-john one last time. How was that possible? I've studied quick brush fires for most of my life in this job, and I had never seen one burn so powerfully and so quickly. And the second corpse was nowhere in sight. Had the second man escaped and just decided to bolt? The fire was to be considered intentional, according to the brief report that Paul had given me, and his number one suspect was this missing man, I was sure. I needed to find more about them. I decided as I checked the kitchen for any evidence of using the back entrance to get out and climb down. Yet also, I couldn't seem to find any accelerant or cause for the blaze itself. It was as though it had simply appeared out of nowhere. I knew not to prejudge the entire situation, but something wasn't adding up and I felt like I was being lied to. I could think of many reasons why that would be, most of them involving money. I took pictures of the burnt office one more time and I prepared to leave, resolving to get the truth from Paul that night. Another thing that was off was the entire vibe of the fire watch. I've always felt that when I visit the aftermath of an incident such as this, they are devoid of life. Yet, as I left the empty building, I had this eerie feeling that someone was watching me. "There's a force that doesn't want us up here," Paul had said. I had no idea if he was being serious or if it was another part of this strange case. There were too many questions. I stopped midway down the tower to take a smoke and look out at the tree line. The sun was down now, and all I could make out were the dark outlines of the firs and the cedars. Forest stretches out like an ocean here, and you can watch the wind ripple across the tops of these trees like gentle waves. But what I saw that night wasn't the wind. I was thinking about just forgetting this whole thing, signing the paper and calling it a night when I saw something move in the trees. And then I realized it was actually a tree itself. One of the dark cedars seemed to gently walk across the horizon as though it had legs. I fumbled and tried to make sure that I wasn't seeing things. It was so dark that I thought my eyes had to be playing tricks on me, so I ran up toward the tower to use the spotlight and get a better look at it. I angled the mighty metallic object, trying to get a good idea of where the strange tree had disappeared to and then turning it on. A long stream of light pierced the night. What I saw, I'm not sure I truly believe or understand. The tree looked like it had a face. Sharp bark contoured and opened into a hollow hole that formed a mouth with sharp edges of broken branches that were meant as teeth. Its body was as wide as a house, and its legs were taller than a giraffe. They seemed to spread out and cover the ground, twisting and snagging the soil as it moved toward the fire watch. I heard a low, bellowing noise, like a grenade going off and then a sharp, pitched shriek. Immediately, I shut the spotlight off and ran. I pushed down the stairs and toward the trail, running for Paul's trailer. As I got inside and slammed the door, his face was a look of confusion and amusement. "Don't tell me you didn't hear that," I asked. He switched off his TV and shrugged. "Eventually, all the wood starts sounding the same. What did you see?" he asked. I took a moment to recompose myself and stood up straight. "It was nothing. I'm just tired," I told him. "You look worse than that," Paul muttered as he offered me some food and grabbed a bug. "I was beginning to wonder what was taking you so long up there. It's nearly morning," he said. I found myself looking like a drunk girl at a frat house party, peeking through the blinds to be sure he was right. "It only felt like 20 minutes at most," I whispered. Paul stood there for a moment, probably trying to decide if I had lost my mind before turning to brew his coffee. "So, what was it like up there?" he asked, munching on his breakfast. I sat down, still unsettled by all that I had seen and trying to make sense of it. "Can you tell me more about the volunteers?" I asked. I took out my recorder to be sure that I didn't miss any of the details. "Wow, this must be serious if you're doing all that." Paul gasped and then cleared his throat. "Well, they seemed like nice enough fellas. I never really bothered to get to know them. This time of year, I'm farther south where we expect to see campers coming in for the holiday. Like I said, no one ever really bothers with Sentinel Peak. It's almost forgotten entirely. So, you weren't here when the fire happened, I guessed. I came to do a check on them. Volunteers are supposed to check in with the ranger's office on a semi-weekly basis, and they had missed a couple of times. A rookie mistake, but I wanted to be sure. When I got over the ridge, I saw the smoke rising and I called it in, he said. Vince said you thought it was arson though. Why would you jump to that conclusion? I asked. Well, I guess I should have brought it up earlier, but our park has been getting threats lately, he admitted. Threats? Like from tree huggers or something? I asked. Paul laughed but nodded as he sipped his coffee. Sentinel Peak is a relic and they want it torn down. Let the forest grow up and push us out. To be honest, before this incident, I was really considering that. Let the ghosts have this place. Nature doesn't want us here anyway, he insisted. I recalled the strange things that I had seen only moments ago. When you say that, what do you mean? Has the Fire Watch had issues in the past? I asked. Hasn't been the first time he lost some volunteers. Vince didn't tell you that, did he? It's one of the main reasons we can't keep good folk. Everyone's scared that they'll wind up disappearing, Paul joked. What do you mean? Have there been other incidents? Not like this. But here and there, one of the volunteers will go missing from the Fire Watch. Their partner usually has to finish it all solo, although half of them just pack up and leave. I would too if I was doing this all alone, and my only help vanishes. When you say vanish, it makes it sound like they don't just grab a flight and go home. Are you saying these people are never seen again? Why haven't they been reported? I asked. Paul looked at me like I was joking and he sighed before explaining. People go missing in these woods all the time. We don't have the budget to search unless someone reports them. These folks that disappear, I guess no one cared. I put down the recorder, recalling that I had only seen one corpse in the Fire Watch. But something different happened this time. I commented as I looked out the window toward the burnt building. Paul, I need you to identify the body that I found. Can you do that? And did you get a good look at these kids? He seemed surprised but went along with it as he grabbed his coat and he walked back toward the tower. My hope was once we realized which body was in the tower, it could help us begin a search for the survivor to determine if this was really arson or something else entirely. I thought this as I unlatched the door. As we stepped in, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Paul held his hand over his face as we closed the door back and I took a second look at the devastation. Everything had changed. Unlike before when I was looking at the front half of the building, now everything in the kitchen was torched and destroyed. The living room and the bathroom seemed unfazed, and the body that I had encountered earlier was also missing. Instead, as we walked to the desiccated kitchen, I saw a different corpse covered in ash, this one staring out the window, looking straight toward the trees that I had seen moving only a few hours ago. They had been preparing to bite down on an apple when the fire had engulfed them. I can't tell which one this is. I'm sorry, Paul admitted as he tried not to gag, but my head was still spinning from the strange change in the room. There was no way I had seen this same devastation earlier. I pulled my phone out and looked at the photographs, confirming that I hadn't simply been seeing things. This isn't natural. It wasn't arson, and it wasn't an accident either. In fact, I'm not sure what happened here, I told him. I let Paul look at the pictures that I had taken to judge his reaction. His face told me that he was just as baffled as me, and frightened too. I don't think we should stay here, he admitted. I disagree. Something unnatural is going on here, and that's exactly why we need to stay, I said as I put my equipment down on the couch. If we stay, it could reveal what had caused all of this, I suggested. He seemed uncomfortable but couldn't give me an excuse to leave, so we both started gathering samples of the burnt materials from the kitchen to test. It could reveal a lot about the fire, I told him as I checked the time. Strange, I thought. It felt as though no amount of time had passed since we had arrived, yet I was exhausted. Was something affecting us mentally here as well? We kept gathering materials for another hour or so, as I felt my energy drain more and more. Before I knew what was happening, I felt the need to collapse on the couch and rest. Paul was complaining that he was feeling nauseous. I think it's these burnt bodies. I don't see how you can stomach any of this, he told me. I ignored him and I closed my eyes, trying to relax and let my mind unwind. Instead, it wasn't long before it felt that I was unraveling. Paul grabbed my shoulders and shook me awake, his eyes confused. Hey, why are you asleep? He asked me as he pointed toward the window. Can't you hear that? It was the booming noise again, the one that made my entire body tremble. I stood up, my knees wobbling as I heard the ground around our tower start to crumble. What is that? I asked. I can't see anything. It's been going on for about 10 minutes. I think it's going to tear us limb from limb, Paul shouted. I raced to the kitchen to get a better look. The glowing eyes of the strange monster in the trees making me want to run the other way. Instead, a swath of fire pushed itself into the tower, covering the counter next to me and making me leap back. The entire counter was covered in flames. Paul ran to grab an extinguisher and doused the small inferno as the monster bellowed and the firewatch shook. We need to get out of here, I said as I ran away from the kitchen. He was standing there at the counter, trying to protect what little was left. Instead, the flames covered his body, the way that ants attack an invasive predator. It made it seem like the fire had a mind of its own. Immediately, I ran from the tower, not bothering to look back. I could hear the gigantic noises from above, and I was sure that if I hesitated for even a moment, the entire firewatch would fall down on top of me. I didn't stop running until I made it to Paul's trailer. I found the radio and I called Vince's station. Mayday, Mayday, this is Sentinel Peak, requesting assistance. There was only static as I heard the creature moving about outside, trying to find me. I could hear the crackling of fire. Was it really going to burn down the whole forest just to exterminate me? I hunched down and waited for the woods to become silent again, and then I heard Vince on the radio. Sentinel Peak, do you copy? I grabbed the receiver and shouted, There's a fire. Send help right away. All rangers need evacuation immediately. The radio filled with static again, and then it died. And then I heard a knock on the door. Instinctively, I grabbed the nearest object to use as a weapon, a letter opener, and I stood by the door to let the stranger in. To my shock and confusion, it was Paul. You're alive? How is that possible? I saw you burning up, I said. He didn't even show signs of scars on his body. He looked just as confused as me. Who the heck are you? He spat back. What? Is this some kind of joke? It's Nathan. I came here to inspect the fire. I kept my distance from him, wondering if he was even the same person that I had met the day before. Had the fire done something to him? Recreated him somehow? Paul mumbled something into his walkie-talkie and then he answered, What fire? We walked out of his trailer and I looked up at Sentinel Peak. It appeared untouched by any blaze at all. What in the world? I said as I started to run toward the stairs. There were no signs of ash or burns or anything that I had seen before. I heard Paul shouting to me as I raced to the top. I needed to see the inside of the Firewatch. I needed to understand what was happening. As I stepped into the tower, I found myself looking at a brand new office, polished furniture, a full pantry. It looked like nothing had been used. Paul stormed in behind me. "Please explain to me what's going on here," he demanded. "There is a fire here. You died. Maybe I died too," I whispered. It was making me nauseous. I was seeing flashes of this other Firewatch, where Paul was devoured by the inferno, and I was the one trapped in the bathroom. "We were the ones who came here. We're trapped inside a nightmare of our own design. That creature, it's made us a part of the forest." Paul was reaching for his gun, clearly disturbed by everything that I said. "You need to leave now," he warned. "Listen to me. We have to stop it before it happens again." But instead of listening, he fired a shot straight toward me. I ducked down and the bullet hit the propane tank right behind me. The explosion forced me toward Paul, a burst of fire consuming the front of the station. The entire Firewatch was covered in an inferno within mere moments. I found myself trying to grab a hold of the splintering wood as the tower crumbled. I was being swallowed up by the devastation, seeping into the very ground. I lost consciousness at some point, hardly able to move from the blast. The Firewatch was gone, but something else now was rumbling toward me. It was the giant. I tried to move and to run, but instead, I realized that my body was trapped by the rubble of the collapsed tower. The monster was reaching down, its massive branches digging up the debris and picking me up as a rag doll. Vines encircled my legs to prevent me from being able to escape as I swung up toward the giant's neck. Its glowing eyes were looking into my soul, and it opened its sharp bark mouth to spread fire over my body. My skin was burning, my body felt paralyzed, and I was becoming a part of this massive tree creature. As it happened, I saw a forest being scorched in front of my eyes. I was taken on an astral journey through the body of this creature. I saw its kind, helplessly watching as man came and tore down the forest, fighting back and taking all they could. Sentinel Peak was one of the few places these creatures still called home, and then the forest rangers built the station. I saw how the tree had to watch on these sidelines as its own brothers and sisters were destroyed. I felt its pain every time they attacked the forest. It happened not once or even a dozen times, but thousands of times, in that the creature could do nothing. By some miracle, perhaps magic or a sacred power of the land itself, the tree found the will to walk into attack. The Firewatch needed to be taken down, for these people had no purpose here. I recalled Paul's words about how useless it was, and now I could see why. These people were wasting resources that belonged to the forest. This was a fight that humanity would lose. I watched as the tree monster used its newfound strength to burn the tower down, the fragments of the earth sorting into different pieces. Each part of these scattered memories were the earth itself, broken and disjointed more than any mere words could convey. It was trying to put itself back together and frozen in time itself, and we were causing it more and more suffering. The giant said nothing, letting me experience all these painful things as I was transported to the edge of the valley, watching as the destruction of the Firewatch put itself back together again. And then the tree was silent and frozen, as if never a monster at all. And I'm as human as I had always been. I stood there for a moment, looking toward a Sentinel Peak and trying to make sense of this strange, otherworldly experience that I had had. I had been given the gift of seeing the world through the eyes of nature, understanding its pain. I saw Paul walking towards me, waving his arms and looking like a fool. Another typical human destroying this blessed land. "You must be the new recruit. Come on up, the place is waiting for ya," he said. He guided me and told me all about the fire watch and its long history. But I wasn't listening. I was looking at the place and how easy it would be to torch it. I waited for him to leave and thanked him, checking my phone and deleting the old photos. The past was removed. Nature healed itself the way that it always does, and now I can play a part and make sure it's completely cured. I doused the fire watch in gasoline and then looked toward the forest horizon as I set a match and let the fire begin to burn. I am part of the desolation now. I am the ash that smolders and lingers and returns to the earth. This place will be forgotten. It will return to what it once was. But we of the forest, we will continue to remain, forever a memory of the suffering that we can endure. From the earliest age that I can recall, becoming a park ranger was my life goal. My father and I spent every free weekend hiking, fishing, and camping in Arlo Bennett National Forest. Not everyone is as lucky as we were to have access to 560,000 acres of pristine woodland, streams, and hiking trails, but with it being a 20-minute drive, we practically lived there from Friday afternoon to Sunday evening. While I could recount hundreds of stories of our exploits in the park, I think it would be best if I stick with the information pertinent to the dangers that I want to warn you of. When I was about 10 years old, my father and I had just finished setting up camp for the night. Our tent was placed, the latrine dug, and our campfire was burning warmly in front of us. After a heavy dinner and a canteen of water, the call of nature indicated that it was time to use the restroom. I wandered to the hole that we had dug away from camp and I relieved myself. As I was zipping my jeans there, a soft whistle coming was from the forest ahead of me. Looking over my shoulder, I could see my father, pipe in mouth, sitting on the ground by our fire. Turning back in the direction of the whistling, I squinted my eyes and peered into the distance to try and identify the source. It was likely a bird, I thought to myself, but there were hints of a subtle melody that kept me from being certain. The fading light of the sun didn't provide me with much of a view, so I continued listening to the soft whistling. Having decided that it warranted no further investigation, I resolved to return to the safety of my father's company and the now much desired illumination of our campfire. I turned around and began trudging through the undergrowth of the forest when, over my shoulder, I was certain that I had heard someone shout from a distance, "It's this way, come and see." My fight, flight, or freeze response immediately chose the worst of all the options as I stopped dead in my tracks. Turning around quickly, I looked in the distance and saw what I thought was the silhouette of someone far in the distance. One arm waved above their head as if to say hello. They didn't call out again, but it appeared a single arm continued to wave in above their head before they eventually dropped it and stepped backward, disappearing behind a monstrously large oak tree. Without another thought, I bolted the short distance back to our campsite and, in a panic, told my father what I thought I had seen and heard. He smiled and reassured me that it was likely nothing more than another camper, but he would investigate, shouldering the strap of his rifle and digging his flashlight out of his bag. We trekked into the woods in the direction I thought that I had seen the figure. My pulse thumped rapidly the farther from camp that we went. As we neared the massive oak that I had seen from the latrine, my father began to sweep the ground with the beam of the flashlight, searching for signs of a disturbance. There was no sign of recent activity. The dried leaves and fallen branches seemed to be completely undisturbed. We continued a quarter of a mile beyond the oak and still found no sign of another camp or any other human activity. My father ruffled my hair with his hand and assured me that It had just been my mind playing tricks on me. I wanted to believe him so badly, but something in my heart told me that I had seen someone, or more unsettling yet, something. After getting back to our camp and settling beside the dwindling embers of our fire, my father did something that he had never done before. He began telling me a ghost story. In this forest, he started, people for over a century had told each other tales of wanderers in the woods. Beautiful melodies whistled in through the trees. Strangers in the distance would wave and beckon travelers to come and see incredible things. Anyone foolish enough to follow them vanished, never to be seen again. Not understanding why he would tell me these things, I began to panic and tears pooled in the corners of my eyes. Seeing the visible comfort, my father smiled and told me that, as a boy, he had thought that he had seen the same things too. My grandfather had told him the same story when he was my age or perhaps a bit younger. Every time they would tread the same trails that he and I hike now, he always imagined hearing or seeing the wanderers in the woods. When he told my grandfather what he had heard and seen, he took it as an opportunity to teach him that the whistling sound was a known call of a local bird. He would also find shapes in the distance and show him how inanimate objects at a distance could produce the illusion of a man or woman watching them. It could also be a practical joke, kiddo, he assured me. When an area has a popular urban legend, folks like to do what they can to stoke the fires. I began to calm down a bit. We were deep within a massive national forest, and the odds of encountering another person were slim at best. My youthful fears had gathered natural occurrences around me and organized them into an unnerving and unlikely scenario. Even if it had been a person, I thought that he was right. They were trying to play a joke on us, and I had fallen for it hook, line, and sinker. I used my posture substantially and smiled thankfully at my father. In all of our trips together after that, I never had the same experience again. That all changed when I began work as a park ranger at Fire Tower Number 1. Arlo Bennett National Forest was full of darkness that my father had worked so hard to convince me was only a figment of my imagination. I wish he had been right. I had just finished college with a degree in wildlife conservation not long before the start of the pandemic. Needless to say, this was not a kind time for new graduates. A local pizzeria near campus had provided me with steady hours and a decent paycheck throughout my studies. But with increasing recommendations and closures, my hours had dwindled to a quarter of what I had previously worked. Being hundreds of miles from home and the not-so-proud owner of a rapidly dwindling bank account, I spent hours each day filling out job applications, sending out resumes, and cold calling every national park and forest that I could find online. Desperation was mounting until I had finally resolved to pack up my belongings and move back to my hometown, tail between my legs. My parents had passed away in a car accident during my sophomore year. I wouldn't be returning to a stable support system, but I was at least confident that old friends and extended family may be able to help me find gainful employment. Steady footing just seemed so far out of reach. Moving day arrived, and I finished boxing up the last of my possessions and stacking them haphazardly into the back of a rented box truck. After barely managing to get my beater of a car secured onto the tow dolly, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. Slumping down onto the tailgate of the box truck, I fished it out and saw a red notification bubble on my mail application, and I clicked it. The feeling of joy I experienced can't be accurately described as I read the attached email. Arlo Bennett, National Forest Hiring Authority. Subject: Your application has been chosen for Fire Tower Number 1 in Arlo Bennett National Forest. Mr. Parker, congratulations and welcome to our team here at Arlo Bennett National Forest. We are excited to inform you that as a new park ranger for wildlife services, you will be stationed at Fire Tower Number 1. You are expected to arrive at Ranger Station 3 on Date redacted. At or before 8 a.m. EST. Uniforms, equipment, shelter, and necessities will be provided as this is a 24/7 live-in posting. If you require storage for personal items that you do not wish to keep in your on-site residence, accommodations will be made upon arrival. Please bring a valid driver's license, a social security card, and a copy of this email to be presented upon arrival. If you have any additional questions or concerns, please contact your HR representatives at 606-555-3241 during the hours of 8 a.m. and 5:30 p.m. We thank you for your time and look forward to meeting you. Welcome to the team. Dennis Garland, Superintendent 2, Arlo Bennett National Forest. After reading the email over and over no less than 10 times, tears began to run down my cheeks. I was mildly confused. The email seemed to be informing me that I had already received the job, but I hadn't even done a phone interview. I told myself that my resume and application must have been such high quality that it wasn't necessary. Hindsight is 2020. Only minutes ago, I was preparing to drive a box truck full of my second-hand furniture and meager possessions pointlessly toward my old hometown. Now I couldn't wait to travel down the road to my new career and what I thought would be a bright future. 2 days and one terrible roadside motel later, I pulled the box truck into a newly empty parking lot in front of a log-sided building with a sign reading, Ranger Station 3. 2 well-aged Jeeps sat parked side by side in front of the station, both marked clearly as Ranger Patrol vehicles. I couldn't help but smile. There I was, right where I had always wanted to be. With a mixed sensation of pride and terror, I made my way into the ranger station and introduced myself to a man with salt and pepper hair sitting at the desk in the entryway. I introduced myself and was greeted with a vice grip of a handshake, and he identified himself as Superintendent Garland. He explained to me that while he was generally not stationed at this location, he made it a goal to personally meet every newly hired ranger and walk them through the orientation process. Over the next few hours, we filled out a seemingly endless pile of paperwork, drank bad coffee out of chipped mugs, and I listened intently to Superintendent Garland as he explained my job duties at Fire Tower Number 1. None of the duties sounded unusual in any way to start. I would work in a 3x3 grid with fire towers 1 to 9. For the first 2 weeks of the month, I would man the tower from 5 a.m. to 5 p.m. A reserve staff member would report to the station to give you a day off to readjust your sleep schedule for the last half of the month. For the following 2 weeks, I would work from 5 p.m. to 5 a.m. Each tower in the grid was staggered by the shift to watch neighboring off-duty sectors around them as well as their own. The primary concern was to watch for the inception of forest fires. Lightning strikes and unauthorized campfires were a constant concern in this area, so around-the-clock surveillance was necessary. All fire tower rangers were provided with a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom cabin located at the base of the tower. They were fully furnished and basic sundries were provided for your first week on the job, with the expectation that you provide your own groceries and toiletries thereafter. Routine maintenance of the cabin and tower was to be performed by the occupying ranger. Mr. Garland also informed me that I would work 4 weeks on duty, with 1 full week off to follow. Reserve staff would report to the cabin at each tower to relieve the primary attendant to allow them some rest and relaxation. The second bedroom was to be reserved for them, and we were to keep it free of personal items. One exception to this rule was in the event a camper or hiker was retrieved during a search and rescue, until they could be evacuated to the nearest town by medical staff. As he wrapped up, I was smiling ear to ear. Dream job, check. Rent-free living, check. After a worrying season of my life, everything seemed to be going my way. I was already making a mental checklist of what personal items to keep in the cabin, and what I would need to store in the provided shed when Mr. Garland's gruff voice unexpectedly pulled me out of my daydream. "One more thing," he said, eyes locking with mine. "Don't travel any farther than a half a mile or so north of Tower 1. "Oh, sure thing," I replied. "No problem at all, but is there any particular reason?" Mr. Garland stared at me in silence for a moment, and I could tell that he was trying to sort out an answer. "Dangerous woods that way, son," he finally responded. "Bobcats and bears, a nasty business." I nodded politely, but it wasn't a terribly satisfying answer. My father and I had camped in that forest for years and had always known predatory wildlife lived throughout the entirety of the reserve area. Unless the bobcats had learned to ride the bears to hunt people down, it seemed unlikely to be any more dangerous than any other area. Regardless, it seemed like a poor plan to argue or question my new employer before my first shift even began. He shook my hand and gave me a few pointers as he walked me to the door. I picked up a duffel bag that they had prepared for me that was sitting in a chair by the door. Heading out to the box truck, I tried to reignite my excitement and invigoration for my new job. But the warning that Superintendent Garland had given me, it still circled inside my mind ominously. "Don't go north." At that moment, I fully intended to adhere to the direction. But soon my curiosity sent me barreling down a dangerous path. My first week at the cabin and tower was a whirlwind of information. The ranger currently occupying my new tower, Thomas Richardson, was a reserve ranger who filled in the off weeks of towers 1 to 3. As he helped me unload my box truck and unhook my car, I picked his brain for every piece of advice that I could think to ask. He had worked for the ranger service there for a little less than a decade. I was surprised to learn that he had originally been offered the permanent role in Fire Tower Number 1, a significant pay increase from reserve status, but he had declined. He said that he loved traveling to the different towers and changing the scenery that each one offered. He seemed like a very genuine and helpful man, but at the back of my mind, I couldn't help but wonder if whatever could be found north of the tower drove him to decline the position. "So, do you ever do any hiking or camping when you're off duty?" I asked on our last day together. "Yeah, at least once a month or so," Thomas replied. "I would say I probably hiked or explored everything within about 5 miles of the fire towers." That seemed like as good of a chance as any to naturally ask Thomas about the area north of the tower. I've got a pretty good grasp on the territory to the east, south, and west, but is there much worth checking out north of the tower? I looked intently in his direction, but he never returned my gaze. Thomas stood up quickly and began to pack his hiking bag without making eye contact. He tossed it over his shoulder and made his way to the door toward the wraparound stairs. Once he had made it outside, he turned and looked at me with a determined face. "North of the tower isn't safe, buddy." He turned and began to walk down the stairs toward his Jeep. "Bobcats and bears that way, stay clear." A few seconds later, I could hear the roar of his engine and the sound of gravel scattering beneath tires as his Jeep made its way down the road. I was surprised by his sudden departure and lack of a formal farewell. It wasn't as if I wouldn't see him again in 3 weeks when he returned to give me my days off, but for such a friendly guy it seemed like a rude exit. A bit of clarity from Thomas had been what I was expecting, but I was just left with a lead weight in my stomach and a slight feeling of dread. The answer had been so quick it seemed as though that he had practiced it, matched with the dash for the door. I was sure something worse than wildlife must be located somewhere in these woods. That evening, after my shift had ended, I radioed the 2 towers in my grid that would be assuming the night watch. Before departing the tower, we had to verify that they were safely on watch. After receiving an affirmative message from both, I began to shut down all of the tower equipment other than the radio and gather up my belongings. There was still a bit of daylight left, so I seized the opportunity to grab a few odds and ends from the storage shed to bring inside. I had mostly settled into the cabin, but there was still a barren bookshelf in the corner that was begging for some of my tattered paperbacks. I dumped the old cardboard box on the floor by the shelf and sat on the hardwood floor. Sitting cross-legged, I opened the box and began to scoop out the haphazardly stored novels and arrange them on the particle board shelf. The bottom was filled, and I was just beginning to load up the top shelf with the last of my New York Times bestsellers when I noticed something was sitting behind the lip of the bookshelf. I reached my hand into the corner and pulled out a worn leather book. There were no markings on the front or back to identify what it was or who it may have belonged to. Thumbing it open to a page marked with an attached leather bookmark, I could see the winding loops of cursive handwriting. Not a book, so to speak, but a journal. Must have belonged to a ranger who had manned the station before me. Momentarily, I considered reading it, but decided against it. Tossing it on top of the bookshelf, I made a mental note to give it to Mr. Garland the next time that I saw him. Maybe he could return it to the rightful owner. After stowing away my books, I took the cardboard box outside and started walking down the gravel path to the storage building. There was a steel cage to place garbage in an attempt to keep larger wildlife from rifling through the bins. I reached down to my hip to retrieve my jingling set of keys to unlock the disposal gate. Setting the box down, I slid the key into the lock and I opened the gate. As I reached down to retrieve the box, I could hear something off in the distance. By then, the light of day was a distant memory and my eyes had not yet adjusted to the darkness. Years of living in the city had made me forget just how dark the forest could be. I had still gone on the occasional hike or camping trip with classmates, but it had usually been a pay-to-stay campsite with bathroom shower combination and pathways lit up with soft wattage light bulbs. It hadn't occurred to me to switch on the light that extended to the storage shed. My visibility was aided only by the light of the cabin's front porch, which was swallowed up by the walls of darkness. That is when the whistling began. It was soft and indistinct, but I could hear it nonetheless. The crunching of leaves and the snapping of twigs in the distance accompanied the unidentifiable tune. I was unable to move as I attempted to locate the direction that it was coming from, but my efforts were fruitless. While the sound seemed to be coming from one point far off in the distance, I could also hear traces of it all around me. Before Thomas had left, we went over to the camping permit logs for our grid and there were none requested within 10 miles of my post. Although the most popular hiking trails were equally far away, so there was little to no reason for anyone to be traveling in that area at this time of night. The only trails nearby were less traveled and given to more experienced hikers. Anyone with the skill to travel those trails would also have the common sense to go and set up camp for the night. As I stood listening and squinting in the darkness, I couldn't help but feel like the 10-year-old boy from so many years ago, but this time I didn't have my father to comfort me. That night around the fire, he was able to explain all of this in a way that made me believe my imagination had just run away with me. Standing there by myself, I felt none of that certainty. The whistling grew louder and more distinct as I stood frozen in the darkness. Where before it was a disembodied and distant voice, I could tell that the source was moving in my direction. There was a haunting yet beautiful melody that I was able to hear more clearly. Crunching leaves and snapping twigs seemed to be just outside my field of vision. It was almost hypnotizing. My eyes began to close and relaxation began to settle into my bones. Icy fear had melted away, leaving me in a state of near bliss. I felt like it may be a good idea to just walk toward the source of the beautiful melody. "It's this way," I heard a soft voice say. "Come and see." The feeling of relaxation washed over me almost as quickly as it had begun. Where the melodic whistling had lulled me into a stupor, the sudden call from the darkness had sobered me to the situation. I stumbled backward toward the cabin and began to run toward the safety of the burning bulb. My heavy footfalls washed out all the noises from moments before. As I ran, I imagined some malevolent creature mere steps behind me, claws outstretched toward my back, still beckoning me to come and see whatever was in the darkness of the forest. Once I reached the front door, I pushed my way inside, slammed the door and engaged the deadbolt and slid onto the floor. My back against it, I simply sat panting and trying to listen for any signs of activity outside. There was no whistling, no footsteps on the walkway or the porch, no knocking. It was just the noise of my gulping breath and the thunder in my heart against my ribcage. After a few minutes, I was able to collect myself enough to put a plan together. If there was someone out there, maybe they were in danger. I went to the control room in the cabin and threw on the breakers to these spotlights, located around the perimeter of the cabin, fire tower, and storage building. Through the blinds of the cabin, I could see the piercing beams of artificial light. Before leaving the control room, I grabbed a floodlight and a hunting rifle from the rack. Slowly, I disengaged the deadbolt to the door and I stepped outside. The forest was now a terrifying combination of artificial light and obscenely long shadows cast by the spotlights. I made my way back down the gravel trail toward the storage building. The whistling had begun just beyond the storage shed. I turned on the handheld floodlights and began to sweep the tree line looking for anyone or anything that may have hung around. Nothing, not a single thing. For all of the crunching leaves and breaking branches that I heard, there was no sign that anything had moved through the area recently. Nothing larger than a squirrel at least. I continued sweeping the distance with the floodlights when I heard the ping of an incoming call on the fire tower watch radio. The sound made me jump and I dropped the light to the ground with a heavy thud. As my heart calmed, I scooped up the light and headed toward the tower. Already out of breath after running from the storage building, the ascent at the top of the tower was painfully slow. I finally reached the lookout box and I turned on the light. "Tower 1, this is Tower 5, do you copy?" I punched the button on the radio mic. "I read to Tower 5, go for Tower 1. "Tower 1, status check," the voice said. "I can see your spotlights over there, Tower 5. Everything okay?" I immediately felt embarrassed and didn't want to explain the commotion of the evening. "Everything's all clear," I responded. Thomas explained how to use the spot system, but I wanted to give it a hands-on run. I'll cut him now. Again, everything is all clear." I thanked the ranger and headed down to the cabin and into the control room to cut the light system off. Hand trembling on the switch, I hesitated. As scared and tired as I had been, I knew that I had to take one last look outside before shutting off the lights. Pulling the cord on the blinds, I looked outside. In the distance at the edge of the spotlights, I thought I could see someone walking into the darkness of the woodline. My heart began to hammer again as I pulled my phone out of my pocket, trying to snap a picture, but they vanished before I had managed to open up the application. Before I returned my phone to my pocket, a curious thought had occurred to me. Thumbing through my applications, I finally found the one that I was looking for. A digital compass popped up on the screen and the needle bounced side to side as my hand shook. Once I was able to settle my nerves, the needle finally came to a rest. It pointed to the north. To say that I was on the edge for the next few days would have been an understatement. My night shift rotation was quickly approaching. While I hadn't seen or heard anything alarming since the night that Thomas had departed, I had also taken special care to avoid the opportunity. No more nighttime traveling out to the storage shed. No taking the trash out in the evening. If I needed to complete any outdoor tasks, I made sure to take care of them during sundown. I had mostly convinced myself that it was all in my imagination, but the thought still rolled around in the back of my head. Maybe I saw and heard exactly what I thought I had. Immediately after my shift each day, I shut down all lookout equipment except the radio and headed directly down to the cabin. My evenings consisted of a steady schedule of TV show binging, dinner, a shower, and reading in bed. The small supply of paperback books that I had bought didn't provide as much entertainment as I had hoped. Most of them I'd already read about a dozen times, and I quickly thumbed through the few that hadn't lost all of their appeal. The paperback that I was reading lost most of its luster, and I put it aside on the nightstand, and I gazed at the bookshelf to see if something else caught my eye. And that's when I saw that journal again. Shuffling out of bed into the bookshelf, I scooped up the journal and tucked myself back beneath my blanket. Initially, I told myself it was immoral to read somebody else's private journal. But still, the odd feeling that place gave me and the lack of other engaging activities made it easier than it should have to justify reading just a few pages. I flipped open the cover to the first page, and I ran my hand over the indentations of the cursive writing on the page. Although I had told myself that I would only read a few pages, that turned into about a quarter of the journal. The beginning introduced me to its writer, Gary Vincent, and his arrival in what would later be my cabin. Entry 1 was dated roughly 2 years before I had arrived, and told the uneventful story of his early life, education, and acceptance of the ranger position at Fire Tower 1 in Arlo Bennett National Forest. Our stories were fairly similar in many respects, but Gary seemed to have skipped the period of self-loathing and desperation before his employment there. While not the most energetic or entertaining read that I've ever come across, there was something enjoyable about learning the personal thoughts of who I assumed was my predecessor. Thomas had trained him as well, and the two of them seemed to have developed a good friendship, if Gary's words were to be believed. The two of them camped and hiked the area together and enjoyed their shared time at the cabin when Thomas came to relieve Gary for his days off. I was beginning to nod, in and out of alertness, having finished about a third of the journal, when an entry had jolted me back to attention. So, there seems to be something weird going on around here. I love everything about living and working in the forest, but now and again, I just get that feeling that something's watching me. I can't quite put my finger on what brings the sensation. It's the same feeling you get when somebody stands behind you in a room, but doesn't say anything. Just an electric charge, a sensation. Last night I was hauling the kitchen trash out to the good old dumpster dungeon when I heard someone whistling out in the woods. I always check the camping permits at the start and end of my shift, so if there's an emergency, I can get out and help them out. But the thing is, there are no permits out this far that we had on record today. I tried calling out to the person whistling, but they would just fall silent whenever I did. A few minutes later, this little tune would pick back up. I would try calling out again, but it was just the same. No more whistling for a minute. There was a time or two I thought someone was telling me to come and look at something, but I'm not sure. I headed into the control room and grabbed a flashlight to search the area, but after a half hour or so of stumbling around in the woods, I called it quits. I didn't see anyone or hear any more whistling. I haven't really been out here all that long, but maybe the lack of daily interaction with people is just making my mind act funny. I don't know, but I'm not too worried about it. If whistling is the worst thing that I hear, I think I'll be in pretty good shape. I read the passage over and over. The same thing had happened to Gary. The only noticeable difference was my total panic compared to Gary's cool and collected approach to investigating the area. I assumed that he hadn't experienced the same event as a child, but it was almost impossible to believe that this wouldn't have seemed kind of strange to him. A second difference also occurred to me. Gary hadn't seen anyone in the woodline. I wasn't positive that I saw a person, but I was certain that I had seen something. Too engaged with these similarities of the journal, I knew that I would be up for the rest of the night until I had finished it. I got out of bed again and headed into the kitchen to make myself a pot of coffee. After the ancient machine had spilled the last drop into the pot, I poured a mugful and settled into the kitchen table to continue my reading. The pages immediately following the whistling event were more of the same day in day out stream of thought entries that you would expect until about 3 months later. This place is starting to mess with my mind a little bit. I was outside last night doing my usual dumpster run when I started hearing that whistling again. Honestly, I had forgotten about the last time that it had happened until 10 or so last night. I tossed the trash in the cage when the whistling had started up. The flashlight was already in my pocket this time. I started carrying it a few weeks ago just as a precaution. It was louder this time and something about it just made me happy. Just felt like I could wander in that direction and hear it a little bit better if I could find who was making that beautiful noise. It kind of made me sad too though. I'm not sure why. I flipped on the flashlight and started walking north into the woods to see if I could find out who it was. I called out and asked who was there. This time someone shouted back, "It's this way, come and see." I asked them what it was but no one answered. When I started walking toward the sound of the voice, I could hear footsteps and the whistle moving away from me. So I called out again for them to wait. I just wanted to talk to them. They just repeated the same thing. "It's this way, come and see." By now I figured that there must be something to check out, so I kept walking after them. Maybe somebody was hurt. Probably not though. If they were hurt, why would they be whistling? My mind was kind of foggy and the melody made the traveling feel a little bit easier though. I felt kind of happy, like something good was going to happen. The woods were starting to get thicker and I wasn't gaining on them. They always seemed to be just the same distance in front of me as they had been the entire time. Occasionally I would catch a glimpse of someone in my flashlight beam, and I would call out, but still the same old thing. "It's this way, come and see." Eventually, I came to a cluster of oak trees that were so tightly packed together that they looked like one monstrous tree. When I got to it, the whistling stopped for a little while and suddenly I felt sad. My eyes teared up and I wasn't sure why. Then the whistling tune came back like it sensed that I needed it again to be happy. Sounded like it was up on the top of the trees. I tried shouting for them again a few times, but nobody answered at first. After a few minutes of trying to get their attention, I finally heard someone reply, "It's up here, come see." "Up where?" I asked the voice. "In the trees, just use the stairs," the voice called back. I ran the flashlight around the base of the trees and in the center. I could see what looked like a step. Inching closer and leaning between two of the oaks, I could see a spiral staircase running up the center of the trees and into the foliage. I started walking forward. The banister felt so smooth under my hand. I wanted to see where it went. For a moment, it felt like it was the right thing to do. Just grab onto the banister and climb up to the top. My foot was just settling onto the bottom step when a vibration startled me back to my senses. My smartwatch was beeping loudly, and when I looked down, I saw my heart rate was nearly 150 beats a minute. I saw the time too. It had only been 10 o'clock when I headed to take the trash out, but it was almost 11:30 now. Seemed like I had only been in the woods for maybe 15 minutes, but it had been an hour and a half. I panicked and headed back in the direction of the cabin. As I made my way back, there was the remnant of an old hiking trail that took me within a stone's throw of the cabin. It took me almost 2 hours to get back. My body aches and I feel like I have the flu. I'm not sure what the heck that was out there, but I'm going to have to call this in at the start of my shift. My heart raced and I continued reading the journal. In the next few pages, Gary recounted how he had called in the staircase to Superintendent Garland the next day. A team of rangers had met him at the cabin. They traveled back to the location where Gary had seen the stairs, but they couldn't find anything out of the ordinary. Gary begged them to go back at night, thinking maybe that they would see it again. The other rangers agreed in an effort to calm Gary's concerns, but the nighttime trip was no different. There was nothing there. The journal entries from that point became almost incoherent in their format. Gary was fixated on how the stairs had disappeared and why they couldn't find them. He admitted traveling back multiple times but never seeing them again. The absence of the whistling also seemed to bother him rather than soothe his worried mind. He wrote endlessly about missing the beautiful melody, and then it maddened him that he couldn't remember all of the notes. And then there was no entry for a long period. Weeks passed between. When Gary wrote what would be his final entry in the journal, he seemed to be a man who had lost a grip on reality. The music didn't return to me. I had been so sad without it. The gentle melody haunted my mind even though I couldn't quite remember how it sounded. So I traveled back again. Down the forgotten path, I traveled north. Traveled to that unusual corpse of trees. And there it was. The stairs were back, thank God. They were there, no one was whistling and no voice had invited me up, but I knew that I needed to go. I belonged there. With them and with him. He was waiting for me. The banister felt so good under my hand as I made my way up, into the foliage, through the branches, into my new home. Everyone is in unison there. The many are one. I came back here to say goodbye to someone. Was there someone here that I knew? I'll just say goodbye to you, journal. I'm going back. I know that I will stay. I want to be in unison. Maybe I can help others find their way there. I hope that you will let me help. So many souls can be won if they let themselves go. To anyone who reads these words, take heart. It is this way. Come and see. That was it. Nothing but blank pages followed. I was shaking as I closed the leather cover and stared into my empty coffee cup. The sun was creeping over the tops of the trees, and I knew that if I didn't move soon, I would be late for the start of my shift. I put on a fresh pot of coffee and began to ready myself in a daze. The journal stayed clutched in my hand as though if it were some talisman that may protect me from Gary's fate. I didn't know exactly what to do in the long run then, but I knew that I had to get to my post. Months had passed since I discovered the journal, and spring was quickly approaching. I would periodically hear the whistling in the woods on evenings when I didn't have to work. The height of the fire tower probably just made it impossible for the melody to reach my ears when I worked nights, but I always assumed that it was there. When the whistling would begin in the evenings, I would put in a pair of earplugs to block it out. It seemed to keep me from feeling that unreasonable sensation to follow the haunting melody. Although it yielded no satisfying information, I shared the journal and its contents with Mr. Garland and Thomas. Mr. Garland explained that Gary Vincent had been a stellar employee for 2 years, but confided in me that he had a history of mental illness. While they explained his complicated situation, Thomas handed me a photo of Gary. He was a few years older than me with bright red hair and a huge smile. They told me that Gary suffered from something similar to schizophrenia. It had been well controlled with medication for quite some time. Once Gary went missing, Thomas and the other rangers found a month's worth of his medicine in the medicine cabinet of the cabin. He had taken to traveling into the northern forest more frequently in the last few months. Thomas Garland and a host of other rangers had traveled to the location with Gary, that he had claimed to have seen the stairs, and there was nothing unusual. Each unsuccessful search seemed to cause him to become a little more distant from them, until eventually they all quit talking unless it had to do with work. The two of them implored Gary to seek help, but he never did, and then he vanished into the woods. The subsequent search for him only turned up his tattered uniform and his wallet. For my part, I continued doing my job. I liked the night shift the best because there was no whistling. Staring out into the darkness for a few hours, looking for fire, soothed my worried mind. My phone ran a constant stream of music to keep me company. When I worked the day shift, I would bring Gary's journal with me and study, as though perhaps I would discover some secret to his madness. I never did. It just seemed to provide a madness of my own that I was obsessed with what had happened to him. I honestly can't tell you why I decided to do what I did next, but the mystery had become more than I could take. Thomas arrived to start my week of duty, and I told him that I planned to do some camping. He seemed excited to have the cabin to himself for a few days. The day before he arrived, I had already unloaded the ATV in the storage shed with camping gear and extra gas. I was going to go find that staircase. As soon as Thomas had started his shift, I fired up the ATV and headed on the trail to the east of the tower, so that he would be less likely to discover my plan. I drove the ATV in a wide arc around the Tower 1 sector, until I was about a quarter-mile due north of the tower. It took me a while, but after hours of searching, I found the rutted trail that Gary had written about in his journal. The trip was uneventful, and with the use of the ATV, I reached the tightly gathered copse of trees in no time. I slid off the ATV and approached the cluster of trees with caution. They formed a tight circle with a 3-foot gap facing toward the south. The canopy shadowed the interior, making it impossible to see what was inside. With a lump in my throat, I pulled the floodlight off the ATV, and I aimed it at the circle of trees. There was nothing inside other than fallen leaves and a few dry branches. My pulse relaxed and my body tension eased. The staircase wasn't there. I felt a mixture of joy and sadness. Gary had seemed so sure of what he had seen, and now I felt sure that he had been suffering from hallucinations. Thomas said that he hadn't taken it in months. A sorrowful picture of a man who had lost grip on reality filled my mind. Walking inside the copse, I couldn't find anything out of the ordinary. Feeling content that the staircase was only a fantasy, I decided to make the most of my days off and follow through with the camping trip. The day was warmer than the seasonal average, so I chose to forego the tent and camp out under the stars. I was only going to be staying overnight, so I opted to not dig a latrine, and I concentrated on setting up a comfortable fire after clearing the brush. Even with the unusually warm day, I still gathered an abundant amount of firewood, just in case it took a substantial dip in temperature. After a quick meal and a few chapters in one of my ragged paperback novels, I decided it was time to turn in for the night. I settled into my sleeping bag and enjoyed the heat from the stone-rimmed fire. It was only moments before I was fast asleep. Sometime during the night, I awoke to a familiar sound. The melody that I had avoided for so many months now was filling my ears, and it was coming from directly behind me. I rolled over and looked into the copse of trees. Standing in the gap between the oaks was Gary. I recognized his wide smile and fire-red hair from the photo that Thomas had shown me. Gnarled tufts of hair sprouted in random directions, and his tattered ranger's uniform hung off his emaciated frame. "Gary?" I asked in a daze. He just continued, giving me that unsettling smile, as he stepped backwards and was enveloped in the darkness of the circle of oak trees. I could hear what sounded like the thuds of hiking boots on wooden boards. Springing from my sleeping bag and grabbing the floodlight, I yelled at Gary's name again. "It's up here, come see," he replied in a manic voice. I turned on the flashlight and aimed it into the trees, expecting to see him hunkered inside, but to my shock, the beam of my floodlight gleamed off a polished mahogany banister. There was a beautifully crafted circular staircase in the center of the trees. Lifting my floodlight, I caught the bottom of Gary's boot as he ascended the stairs, Shouting his name, I sprinted inside. "Gary, no!" I shrieked. My hand grabbed the smooth, cold wood as I began to climb the stairs in their tight circle. "Come back, man. We need to get you some help." I could only hear the thuds of his footfalls as he continued upward. My pulse was racing as I bounded up behind him, clinging tightly to the banister. Leaves and branches traced the side of my face as we both climbed higher into the trees. The beam of my floodlight bounced and weaved between smooth mahogany wood and dense foliage. As hard as I climbed the stairs, I could hear that Gary was getting farther ahead of me. My pace was beginning to slow, but I still clung to the banister, using it to pull myself up as I tried to reach the man racing ahead of me. The smoothness of the wood began to change under my hand as I climbed higher. What had been an unblemished surface began to feel bumpy and rigid on my palm. I was starting to breathe heavily through my mouth, and I knew that I would need to rest soon. In exhaustion, I decided to try to stop and catch my breath. The beam of my floodlight was pointed toward the stairs, but they looked different than they had when I first saw them. Where there had been a rich brown at the bottom, they now appeared the color of half-burnt charcoal. I traced the light up higher to get a better view of my surroundings, and I discovered why the banister felt so different. The smooth wood had transitioned into what looked like an unending spinal cord. The bones curled upward, wrapping around the charcoal steps like a pale snake. The foliage around me, which had been budding and green when I started my ascent, was now the sickly purple of a healing black eye with throbbing veins running through the leaves. Balls of black dew dotted the tops of the leaves. I noticed that anywhere this dew had made contact with my clothes, small holes appeared, and I could smell the light scent of chemical burn and hints of decay. The branches of the trees made sudden pattern changes from obsidian to ashen white. I began to scream and turned to go back down when I saw the section of steps below me crumble and fall away into nothingness. There was no way that I had climbed more than the equivalent of 6 flights of stairs, but I watched as chunks of the burnt charcoal platform and spinal cord banister drifted off into a purple chasm. As I tried to gain my composure and figure out what to do next, I could feel the stuff below me beginning to crack and sink. Without another thought, I began to run up the stairs as quickly as I could. All the while, I could hear the step just behind me crumble and drop off into the purple abyss below. There would be no more breaks to catch my breath. I couldn't even afford to glance backward unless I wanted to end up drifting off into whatever unknown abyss ran below. The air seemed to get thinner and had the tang of rotting meat. I could feel my legs buckling and struggling to keep up with the stairs, and I knew that I would soon fall back into what was below. Just as I felt the last of my strength gave away, my hand reached for another section of the spinal banister but found only empty air. My foot rose to find one more burnt charcoal step, but instead, it extended forward and found no purchase. I fell forward onto level ground. My floodlight flickered across the ground, revealing a gray and writhing field before me. It was damp and I could feel it pulse beneath my palms. I jumped up in a panic to get my hands off of the disgusting material. My hand shook violently as flecks of gray sludge flew wildly from my fingers. I was wiping the rest of the muck onto my pant legs when I lifted my eyes to the scene before me. The sky was a flowing haze of purple, full of a thick fog. There was no variation to this gray terrain. It writhed and shifted as far as I could see. Dotted over the landscape were thin, leafless trees swaying lazily in the cold wind. As my eyes focused in the low, unearthly light, I realized that they weren't trees at all. They were emaciated people. Thousands of them with bone-thin arms raised, reaching toward the sky. Some of their feet were held in place by skeletal hands emerging from the ground, while others seemed to be growing into a gray mass like a plant. Their eyes glowed softly with the same purple light as the sky. All at once, the numberless horde turned their heads towards me and spoke. "We are many, but we are one in him," thousands of voices said in unison. "You have heard this beautiful song, and now you will sing it with us forever." A few yards in front of me stood Gary. The same sick purple glow flowed from his eyes, but he stood with his arms at his side. He motioned with both hands to a spot just beside him and smiled that unsettling smile. On the ground where he pointed were two writhing skeletal hands. "You've heard the song," he said in a dreamy voice. "This is where you belong, with us." I wanted to beg him to go back with me, to tell him that it wasn't too late, that we could help him if he would only let us. Staying there was madness. He had been twisted into something that he was. Before I could say anything, I started to feel that it wasn't as twisted as it had first seemed. The melody that I had heard so many times in the woods echoed everywhere now. The forest of skyward-reaching people produced an overpowering wave of sound, as they all whistled the same hauntingly beautiful melody. I started to walk toward Gary and thought that this all made sense. Everyone here looked so happy. The purple of this world was even beginning to become beautiful to me. I was nearly halfway to Gary when I halted for a moment and looked over my shoulder. There was an opening in the ground where the stairs had been. My head darted from side to side, and I could see more of these openings in the ground between these swaying forests of humans. There must be hundreds of these staircases leading up to this world. From my world, I realized, bringing people from our world to this brainwashing place. Looking back at Gary, I could see that same smile as before, but there was a nervousness to it. It was almost pleading with me to step aside him and accept those skeletal hands and allow them to wrap around my ankles. But then I noticed the tears running down his face and the ever so subtle shaking of his head. He was trying to tell me no. Before I could ask him to tell me where we were, to ask what the heck was going on or what was happening there, I was startled by the deafening sound. It was almost like a foghorn, but so much deeper. My bones shook violently. The ground beneath me quaked, and the beautiful melody from the forest of people suddenly turned into a blood-curdling shriek. Their hands dropped from the sky and covered their ears, and I did the same. The second boom of the foghorn came, and the rioting forest lifted their heads, mouths opening until their jaws nearly unhinged. Thin streams of blue and yellow smoke drifted out of them, swirling together into a twisting cloud above our heads. It began to funnel into a stream and drifted into the distance. My eyes followed the tip of the swirling stream until I saw something moving far in the distance. It was mountainous, larger than anything that I had ever seen. The colossal silhouette was robed in fog, but I could still make out the shape. It towered above the field, blocking out the purple glow of the distant horizon. It seemed to sprout out of the ground into a thick torso with arms so thin that they seemed like they would snap if they were made to hold any weight. At the end of these bony arms, I could see clawed hands, scooping up people trapped in the gray ground in front of it. An oval-shaped mouth with two ivory protruding husks split open from its squat, stocky head. A cavernous mouth full of slender, sharp teeth gleamed in the sickening light. Two clawed hands shoved handfuls of screaming people into its mouth, in between long drinks from the blue and yellow smoke that drifted towards it. "They are blessed to become one with him," the forest of humans shrieked. "He will welcome you too. Come and see." The appearance of the eldritch horror was more than I could bear. I stumbled backward and fell to the ground as the gray mass writhed underneath my hands again. Using my feet, I pushed myself back toward the hole that I had emerged from and looked back at Gary. He was still crying, but he was nodding in agreement now as I got closer to the hole. I could see now that he was held in place by the same writhing hands that he was gesturing toward. Frozen in place, I thought for a moment that I would run to Gary and drag him with me. He must have seen it in my eyes. His smile faded as his brows furrowed and his lips pulled back in a pain-filled grimace. "Go!" he screamed, voice filled with agony. "It's too late for us. Go!" I broke my gaze with Gary and looked into the sky at the impossibly large abomination towering over the forest of tortured souls. Its massive hand broke through the fog and reached for me. Without another thought, I pushed myself back into the hole and closed my eyes. Floating in an endless void was better than allowing that ageless horror to consume me, or add me to its blasphemous garden of souls. The sensation of falling was terrifying and my stomach began to ball up tightly. I could feel myself moving faster and faster as the sickening purple void swirled around me. My eyes closed and I prayed that I would die soon to spare me from the nightmare. That is when I began to feel a sharp pain in my back as something began to strike me. I opened my eyes, but it was almost completely dark now. My body was slamming against solid objects, knocking the wind from my lungs. My descent began to slow and I could feel something soft and angular brush against my face as my body continued to be pummeled with blow after blow. My eyes were beginning to focus on the growing light and I could see that I was slamming into tree branches. Extending my arms, I was able to briefly grasp onto them to slow my fall. After what felt like hours, I landed with a sickening thud on the ground, and everything went black. When I came to, I was in front of the abnormal circle of trees. Dirt and saliva were caked in my face and my vision swam with ripples from the impact. I sucked in panicked breaths as I looked at these smooth mahogany stairs only a feet in front of me. My entire body ached, but I pushed myself up and staggered to the ATV to retrieve the gas can. Fuel spilled out of the upturned can as I dumped the contents at the foot of those stairs. I pulled a book of matches from my pocket and I flicked it into the trees. A rush of warmth hit me as the fire swallowed the stairs and the trees surrounding them. My vision began to swim again and I felt unconsciousness wash over me once again. I woke up in a hospital in my hometown. Thomas was asleep in an armchair beside my bed. He had awoke when I started shifting in the bed while attempting to make myself comfortable. My left arm was in a cast as well as my left leg. Reaching up to scratch my head, I could feel missing patches of hair. I was covered in bruises and cuts from head to toe. Thomas told me that they had found me after he spotted rising smoke from the lookout booth in Fire Tower Number 1. When the rangers and forestry services arrived, they found me at the foot of the blazing trees. I had been in the hospital for 3 days and had been in and out of consciousness. He asked me repeatedly what had happened, but I lied and told him that I wasn't sure. After Mr. Garland was informed that I was awake, he stopped by for a visit too. It was pretty similar to my visit with Thomas. He told me what had happened from his perspective and asked what had happened. I already practiced at lying about the whole ordeal. I told him that I didn't know. I had gone camping and woke up in the hospital. I wasn't fired from my job, but I never returned to Fire Tower Number 1. The Ranger Service investigated the fire, and while they were able to ascertain that it had been intentionally set, I wasn't suspected due to my battered state when they had discovered me. The last that I had spoken with him, Thomas told me that he had accepted the full-time position at Fire Tower Number 1, and I wished him good luck. As for me now, I've taken a traveling position with the National Forestry Service. I travel the country performing survey studies of the national forests under our care. It's been nice to see the country, and I still spend every available moment I have hiking and camping. My motivation is a bit different now. In every new town that I travel to, I always ask the locals if there are any local legends about whistling in the woods. I'm always looking for staircases in places that they should not be. I'll never forget what I saw in that purple-tinted place. What haunts me the most is remembering those hundreds of holes that I knew must lead to hundreds of different staircases. I always listen for whistling in the woods now, and I always carry an extra can of gas.